Section 33 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Pamela Krantz. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. Edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. Clydie by Flora J. Cook. Clydie was not always a sunflower, turning on her stem to watch the journeying sun. Long ago she was a water nymph and lived in a cave at the bottom of the sea. The walls of the cave were covered with pearls and lovely pink seashells. The floor was made of snow-white sand, and the chairs were of amber with soft mossy cushions. On each side of the cave opening was a forest of coral and sea fans. Behind the cave were Clydie's gardens. Here she spent long hours taking care of her sea anemones, her star lilies, or in planting rare kinds of seaweed. Clydie kept her favorite horses in the garden grotto. These were the swift-darting goldfish and the slow-moving turtles. For a long time she was very happy and contented. The sea nymphs loved Clydie, and wove for her dresses of the softest of green sea lace. They told her all their best stories. One day they took her to the Mermaid's Rock to hear the mermaids sing. Clydie liked one song best of all. It told of a glorious light which shone on the top of the water. After Clydie heard this song she could think of nothing else, but longed day and night to see the wonderful light. But no ocean nymph dared take her to it, and she grew very unhappy. Soon she neglected her garden and all her sea treasures. In vain the nymphs begged her to forget the enchanting light. They told her no sea nymph had ever seen it, or ever could hope to see it. But Clydie would not listen, and to escape them she spent more and more of her time in her shell carriage, riding far away from her cave. In this way she could dream undisturbed of the glorious light which the mermaid had called the sun. Now it happened that late one summer night, when the sea was warm and the turtles were going very slowly, Clydie fell asleep. Unguided, the turtles went on and up through the green waters until they came out at last close to a wooded island. As the waves dashed the carriage against the shore, Clydie awoke. Trembling and filled with wonder, she climbed out of the shell and sat down upon a rock. It was early dawn, and the waking world was very beautiful. Clydie had never seen the trees and the flowers. She had never heard the birds chirping, or the forest wind rustling the leaves. She had never smelled the fragrance of the meadows, or seen the morning dew upon the grass. She was dazed by all these wonders, and thought she must be dreaming, but soon she forgot all about them, for the eastern sky blazed suddenly with light. Great purple curtains were lifted, and slowly a great ball of dazzling fire appeared, blinding her eyes with its beauty. She held her breath and stretched out her arms toward it, for she knew at once that this was the glorious light she had dreamed about and longed for. This was the sun. In the midst of the light was a golden chariot drawn by 4 fiery steeds, and in the chariot sat a wonderful smiling king, with 7 rays of light playing around his crown. As the steeds mounted higher and higher in their path, the birds began to sing, the plants opened their buds, and even the old sea looked happy. Clydie sat all day upon the rock, her eyes fixed upon the sun, with a great love and longing in her heart. She wept when the chariot disappeared in the west and darkness came over the earth. The next day, from sunrise to sunset, she gazed upon the sun, and at night she refused to go home. For 9 days and nights she sat with her golden hair unbound, tasting neither food nor drink, only longing more and more for the smile of the glorious king. She called to him and stretched out her arms, yet she had no hope that he would ever notice her, or know of the great love that filled her heart. On the 10th morning, when she leaned over the water, she was amazed, for instead of her own face a beautiful flower looked up at her from the sea. She gazed long, and at length in wonder she knew the truth. Her yellow hair had become golden petals, her green dress had turned into leaves and stems, and her little feet had become roots which fastened her to the ground. Clydie had become the small and humble image of the sun. The next morning, when she lifted her face to the beautiful light, it was so radiant with happiness that the great king himself seemed to smile back kindly at the happy little flower. And so Clydie began her life upon the earth, and she became the mother of a large family of flowers with bright faces like her own. Her children are called sunflowers, and you may find them scattered all over the country, even in the dry and dusty places where other flowers will not grow. And if you care to, you may find out for yourselves whether or not it is true that all the sunflowers in the world turn upon their stalks from sunrise until sunset, so that they may always keep their faces toward the sun. End of section 33. Recording by Pamela Krantz.
Section 34 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Bookhouse. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sue Hatch. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Bookhouse, edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. How the Brazilian Beetles Got Their Gorgeous Coats, by Elsie Spicer Eels. In Brazil, the beetles have beautiful colored, hard-shelled coats upon their backs like precious stones. Once upon a time, years and years ago, they had ordinary plain brown coats. This is how it happened that the Brazilian beetle earned a new coat. One day a little brown beetle was crawling along a wall when a big gray rat ran out of a hole in the wall and looked down scornfully at the little beetle. "Oh," he said to the beetle, "how slowly you crawl along. You'll never get anywhere in the world. Just look at me and see how fast I can run." The big gray rat ran to the end of the wall, wheeled around, and came back to the place where the little beetle was slowly crawling along at only a tiny distance from where the rat had left her. "Don't you wish you could run like that?" said the big gray rat to the little brown beetle. "You are surely a fast runner," replied the little brown beetle, politely. Her mother had taught her always to be polite, and had often said to her that a really polite beetle never boasts about her own accomplishments. The little brown beetle never boasted a single boast about the things she could do. She just went on slowly crawling along the wall. A bright green and gold parrot in the mango tree over the wall had heard the conversation. "How would you like to race with the beetle?" he asked the big gray rat. "I live next door to the tailor bird, and just to make the race exciting, I'll offer a bright colored coat as a prize to the one who wins the race. You may choose it for any color you like, and I'll have it made to order." "I'd like a yellow coat with stripes like the tiger's," said the big gray rat, looking over his shoulder at his gaunt gray sides, as if he were already admiring his new coat. "I'd like a beautiful bright-colored new coat, too," said the little brown beetle. The big gray rat laughed long and loud until his gaunt gray sides were shaking. "Why, you talk as if you thought you had a chance to win the race," he said when he could speak. The bright green and gold parrot set the royal palm tree at the top of the cliff as the goal of the race. He gave the signal to start, and then he flew away to the royal palm tree to watch for the end of the race. The big gray rat ran as fast as he could, and then he thought how very tired he was getting. "What's the use of hurrying?" he said to himself. "The little brown beetle cannot possibly win. If I were racing with someone who could really run, it would be very different." Then he started to run more slowly, but every time his heart beat, it said, "Hurry up, hurry up." The big gray rat decided that it was best to obey the little voice in his heart, so he hurried just as fast as he could. When he reached the royal palm tree at the top of the cliff, he could hardly believe his eyes. He thought he must be having a bad dream. There was the little brown beetle sitting quietly beside the bright green and gold parrot. "How did you ever manage to run fast enough to get here so soon?" he asked the little brown beetle as soon as he could catch his breath. The little brown beetle drew out the tiny wings from her sides. "No one said anything about having to run to win the race," she said. "So I flew instead." "I did not know that you could fly," said the big gray rat in a subdued little voice. "After this," said the bright green and gold parrot, "never judge anyone by his looks alone. You can never tell how often or where you may find concealed wings. You have lost the prize." Until this day, even in Brazil, where the flowers and birds and beasts and insects have such gorgeous coloring, the rat wears a plain dull gray coat. Then the parrot turned to the little brown beetle, who was waiting quietly at his side. "What color do you want your new coat to be?" he asked. The little brown beetle looked up at the bright green and gold parrot, at the green and gold palm trees above their heads, at the green mangoes with the golden flushes on their cheeks lying on the ground under the mango trees, at the golden sunshine upon the distant green hills. "I choose a coat of green and gold," she said. From that day to this, the Brazilian beetle has worn a coat of green with golden lights upon it. For years and years, the Brazilian beetles were all very proud to wear green and gold coats like that of the beetle who raced with the rat. Then, once upon a time, it happened that there was a little beetle who grew discontented with her coat of green and gold. She looked up at the blue sky and out at the blue sea and wished that she had a blue coat instead. She talked about it so much that finally her mother took her to the parrot who lived next door to the tailor bird. "You may change your coat for a blue one," said the parrot, "but if you change, you'll have to give up something." "Oh, I'll gladly give up anything, if only I may have a blue coat instead of a green and gold one," said the discontented little beetle. When she received her new coat, she thought it was very beautiful. It was a lovely shade of blue, and it had silvery white lights upon it, like the light of the stars. When she put it on, however, she discovered that it was not hard like the green and gold one. From that day to this, the blue beetle's coats have not been hard and firm. From the moment that the little beetle put on her new blue coat, she never grew again. From that day to this, the blue beetles have been much smaller than the green and gold ones. When the Brazilians made their flag, they took it for a square of green, the color of the green beetle's coat. Within this square they placed a diamond of gold, like the golden lights which play upon the green beetle's back. Then, within the diamond, they drew a circle to represent the round earth, and they colored it blue, like the coat of the blue beetle. Upon the blue circle they placed stars of silvery white, like the silvery white lights on the back of the blue beetle. About the blue circle of the earth, which they thus pictured, they drew a band of white, and upon this band they wrote the motto of their country, Ordem e Progresso, Order and Progress. End of section 34. Recording by Sue Hatch, San Francisco Bay Area.
Section 35 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michelle Eaton. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. Edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. Little Goody Two Shoes, ascribed by Oliver Goldsmith. All the world must know that Two Shoes was not her real name. No, her father's name was Meanwell, and he was for many years a farmer in the parish where Marjorie was born. But Marjorie and her little brother Tommy were early left alone to the wide world. It would have done your heart good to have seen how these two little ones were so fond of each other, and how hand in hand they trotted about. They were both very ragged, and Tommy had no shoes, and Marjorie had but one. They had nothing, poor things, to support them but what they picked from the hedges or got from the poor people, and they lay every night in a barn. Mr. Smith was a very worthy clergyman, who lived in the parish where little Marjorie and Tommy were born, and having a relation come to see him, who was a charitable good man, he sent these children to him. The gentleman ordered little Marjorie a new pair of shoes, gave Mr. Smith some money to buy her clothes, and said he would take Tommy and make him a little sailor. After some days, the gentleman intended to go to London and take little Tommy with him. The parting between these little children was very affecting. Tommy cried, and they kissed each other 100 times. At last Tommy wiped off his sister's tears with the end of his jacket, and bid her cry no more, for that he would come to see her again when he returned from the sea. As soon as little Marjorie got up the next morning, she began crying for her brother. However, at this instant the shoemaker came in with the new shoes, for which she had been measured by the gentleman's order. Nothing could have helped little Marjorie to bear the parting with her brother, but the pleasure she took in her 2 shoes. She ran out to Mrs. Smith as soon as they were put on, and, stroking down her ragged apron, thus cried out, "2 shoes, ma'am, see, 2 shoes." And so she behaved to all the people she met, and by that means obtained the name of Goody Two Shoes. Little Marjorie was very happy in being with Mr. and Mrs. Smith. She saw how good and how wise Mr. Smith was, and concluded that this was owing to his great learning. Therefore, she wanted of all things to learn to read. For this purpose she used to meet the little boys as they came from school, borrow their books, and sit down and read till they returned. By this means she got more learning than any of her playmates, and laid the following scheme for instructing those who knew less than herself. With her knife she cut out of wood 10 sets of little letters: A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. And having got an old spelling book, she made her companions set up all the words they wanted to spell. I once went her rounds with her, and was highly diverted. It was about 7 o'clock in the morning when we set out on this important business, and the first house we came to was Farmer Wilson's. Here Marjorie stopped and ran to the door, tap, tap, tap. "Who's there?" "Only little Goody Two Shoes," answered Marjorie, "come to teach Billy." "Oh, little Goody," says Mrs. Wilson, with pleasure in her face, "I am glad to see you. Billy wants you sadly, for he has learned his lesson." Then out came a little boy. "How do, Goody Two Shoes," says he, not able to speak plain. Yet this little boy had learned all his letters, for she threw down this alphabet mixed together thus: B, D, F, H, K, M, O, Q, S, U, W, Y, X, J, A, C, E, G, I, L, N, P, R, T, V, Z. And he picked them up, called them by their right names, and put them all in order thus: A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. The next place we came to was Farmer Simpson's. "Bow, wow, wow," says the dog at the door. "Sirrah," says his mistress, "why do you bark at little Two Shoes? Come in, Madge. Here, Sally wants you sadly. She has learned all her lesson." "Yes, that's what I have," replied the little one in the country manner, and immediately taking the letters, she set up these syllables: Ba, be, bi, bo, boo. Da, de, di, do, do. Ka, ke, ki, ko, ku. Ka, si, ko, ku. Fa, fee, fo, foo, and gave them their exact sound as she composed them. The next place we came to was Gaffer Cook's cottage. Here a number of poor children were met to learn, who all came round little Margery at once. Having pulled out her letters, she asked the little boy next to her what he had for dinner, who answered bread. Well then, says she, set up the first letter. He put up the B, to which the next child added R, and the next E, the next A, the next D, and it stood thus, bread. And what had you, Polycomb, for your dinner? Apple pie, answered the little girl, upon which they set up these words, with many others, till the game of spelling was finished. Margery then set them another task, and we proceeded. So little Goody Two-Shoes kept herself busy, learning and teaching, until her brother Tommy, after many adventures, returned to her again from sea, and brought back treasures enough to make them both comfortable and happy. End of section 35.
Section 36 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sandra Luna. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. Edited by Olive Bopp Miller. The Little Busy Bee by Isaac Watts. How doth the little busy bee improve each shining hour, and gather honey all the day from every opening flower! How skilfully she builds her cell, how neat she spreads the wax, and labours hard to store it well with the sweet food that she makes. In works of labour or of skill I would be busy too, for Satan finds a mischief still for idle hands to do. In books or work, or healthful play, let my first years be past, that I may give for every day some good account at last. End of section 36.
Section 37 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Margaret Roadheaver. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. The Story of Lil Hannibal, transcribed by Carolyn Sherwin Bailey. Once on a time, way down south, there lived a little boy named Hannibal. Lil Hannibal. He lived along with his grandmammy and his granddaddy in a little one-story log cabin that was set right down in a cotton field. Well, from morning until night, Lil Hannibal's grandmammy kept him totin' things. As soon as he woke up in the morning, it was, "Oh, Lil Hannibal, fetch a pine knot and light the kitchen fire. Oh, Lil Hannibal, fetch the tea kettle to the well and get some water for the tea. Oh, Lil Hannibal, mix a little hoe cake for your granddaddy's breakfast. Oh, Lil Hannibal, take the bunch of turkey's feathers and dust the hearth." And from morning till night, Lil Hannibal's granddaddy kept him totin' things too. "Oh, Lil Hannibal," his granddaddy would say, "fetch the corn and feed the turkeys. Oh, Lil Hannibal, take your lil axe and chop some lightwood for your grandmammy's fire. Oh, Lil Hannibal, run round to the store and buy a bag of flour. Oh, Lil Hannibal, fetch your basket and pick a lil cotton off the edge of the field." So they kept poor Lil Hannibal toting most all day long, and he had only 4 or 5 hours to play. Well, one morning Lil Hannibal woke up and he made up his mind to something. Before they could ask him to light the kitchen fire, or fill the tea kettle, or mix the hoe cake, or dust the hearth, or feed the turkeys, or chop any wood, or go to the store, or pick any cotton, he had made up his mind that he was not going to tote for his grandmammy and his granddaddy any longer. He was going to run away. So Lil Hannibal got out of bed very quietly. He put on his lil trousers and his lil shirt and his lil suspenders and his lil shoes. He never wore stockings. He pulled his lil straw hat down tight over his ears, and then Lil Hannibal ran away. He went down the road past all the cabins. He went under the fence and across the cotton fields. He went through the pine grove past the schoolhouse, stooping down low so the schoolmistress wouldn't see him, and then he went way, way off in the country. When he was a long way from town, Lil Hannibal met a possum loping along by the edge of the road, and the possum stopped and looked at Lil Hannibal. "How do? Where you going, Little Hannibal?" asked the possum. Lil Hannibal sat down by the side of the road, and he took off his straw hat to fan himself, for he felt quite warm, and he said, "I done run away, Brer Possum. My grandmammy and my granddaddy kept me totin' for them all the time. I doesn't like to work, Brer Possum." "Po, Lil Hannibal," said the possum, sitting up and scratching himself. "Any special place you bound for?" "I don't reckon so," said Lil Hannibal, for he was getting tired and he had come away without any breakfast. "You come along o' me, Lil Hannibal," said the possum. "I reckon I can take you somewhere." So the possum and Lil Hannibal went along together, the possum loping along by the side of the road, and Lil Hannibal going very slowly in the middle of the road, for his shoes were full of sand and it hurt his toes. They went on and on until they came all at once to a sort of open space in the woods, and then they stopped. There was a big company there, Brer Rabbit and Brer Partridge and Brer Jaybird and Brer Robin and Ol' Miss Guinea Hen. "Here's po' Lil Hannibal come to see you," said the possum. "Lil Hannibal done run away from his grandmammy and his granddaddy." Lil Hannibal hung his head like as if he was ashamed, but nobody noticed him. They were all as busy as ever they could be, so he just sat down on a pine stump and watched them. Each one had his own special work, and he was keeping at it right smart. Brer Robin was gathering all the holly berries from the south side of the holly tree and singing as he worked, "Cheer up, cheer oo." Brer Partridge was building a new house down low in the bushes. As he hurried back and forth with twigs, he would stop and drum a little, he felt so happy to be busy. Brer Jaybird was taking corn down below. You know that's what Brer Jaybird does all the time, takes one kernel of corn in his bill to the people down below, and then comes back for another. It is a very long trip to take with one kernel of corn, but Brer Jaybird doesn't seem to mind. Ol' Miss Guinea Hen was about the busiest of the whole company, for she was laying eggs. As soon as ever she laid one, she would get up on a low branch and screech, "Catch it, catch it, catch it," like to deafen everybody. But Lil Hannibal was most interested to see what Brer Rabbit was doing. Brer Rabbit had on a little apron, and he kept bringing things in his market basket. Then he cooked the things over a fire back in the bushes, and when it got to be late in the afternoon, he spread a tablecloth on a big stump, and then he pounded on his stew pan with his soup ladle. "Supper's ready," said Brer Rabbit. Then Brer Robin and Brer Partridge and Brer Jaybird and Brer Possum and Ol' Miss Guinea Hen all scrambled to their places at the table, and Lil Hannibal tried to find a place to sit at, but there wasn't any for him. "Po' Lil Hannibal," said Brer Rabbit as he poured out the soup, "doesn't like work, can't have no supper." "Catch him," said Ol' Miss Guinea Hen, but no one did it. They were all too busy eating. They had a grand supper. There was breakfast strip and roast turkey and fried chicken and mutton and rice and hominy and sweet potatoes and peas and beans and baked apples and cabbage and hoe cake and hot biscuit and corn muffins and butter cakes and waffles and maple syrup. When they were through eating, it was quite dark, and they all went home, even Brer Possum, and they left Lil Hannibal sitting there all by himself. Well, after a while it began to get darker. Brer Mockingbird came out, and he looked at Lil Hannibal, and then he began to scream just like Ol' Miss Guinea Hen, "Catch him, catch him, catch him!" Brer Screech Owl looked down from a tree, and he said very hoarsely, "Ooh, ooh, ooh, ooh." Then all the frogs began to say, loud and shrill, "Lil Hannibal, Lil Hannibal!" So Lil Hannibal got up from his pine stump, and he said, "I reckon I better go home to my grandmammy." Well, Lil Hannibal started for home slowly because his feet hurt and he was hungry. When he came to the pine grove by the schoolhouse, the shadows came out from behind the trees and followed him, and that was much worse than seeing the schoolmistress. But Lil Hannibal got away from them all right. He crawled under the fence and ran across the cotton field, and there in the door of the cabin was his granddaddy with a lantern. His granddaddy had been out looking for Lil Hannibal. "Why, Lil Hannibal, where you been all day?" asked his granddaddy. "Why, Lil Hannibal," said his grandmammy, "here's your corn mush. I kep' it warm on the hearth, but afore you eat your supper, Lil Hannibal, just take your lil basket and run round to the chicken house for a couple of eggs." So Lil Hannibal took his lil basket and he started off for those eggs, singing all the way. You see, he reckoned he was mighty glad to be at home and toting again. End of section 37. Recording by Margaret Roadheaver.
Section 38 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Bookhouse. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Candace Stellick, Dallas, Texas. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Bookhouse. Edited by Olive Bepure Miller. A Story About the Little Rabbits by Joel Chandler Harris. "Find 'em where you will and when you may," remarked Uncle Remus with emphasis. "Good chilluns allers gets tuck on. There was Brer Rabbit's chilluns. Dey minded der daddy and mammy from days and to days in. When ole man Rabbit say scoot, dey scooted, and when ole Miss Rabbit say scat, dey scatted. Dey did dat, and dey kept der clothes clean, and dey ain't had no smut on der nose needer." Involuntarily the hand of the little boy went up to his face, and he scrubbed the end of his nose with his coat sleeve. "Dey was good chilluns," continued the old man heartily. "Even if dey hadn't er been, der was one time when dey wouldn't er been no little rabbits, na'er one, dat's what." "What time was that, Uncle Remus?" the little boy asked. "De time when Brer Fox drapped into Brer Rabbit's house, and didn't found nobody dere 'cep'n de little rabbits. Ole Brer Rabbit he was off summers riding on a collared patch, and ole Miss Rabbit she was tending on a quiltin' in de neighborhood. And whiles de little rabbit was playin' hide and switch, in drapped Brer Fox. De little rabbits was so fat that they fairly made his mouth water, but he 'member 'bout Brer Wolf, and he skeered fer to gobble 'em up 'cep'n he got some 'skuse. De little rabbits, dey mighty skittish, and dey sorter huddled deyse'f up toge'rr and watched Brer Fox motions. Brer Fox he sat there and study what sorter 'skuse he gwineter make up. Bimeby he see a great big stalk er sugar cane standin' up in de corner, and he cl'ar up his throat and talk biggity. 'You young rabbits dere, set roun' yer and broke me a piece er dat sweetin' tree. Sees, and den he cough. De little rabbits dey got out de sugar cane. Dey did, and dey wrastle wid it, and sweat over it, but 'twa'n't no use. Dey couldn't broke it. Brer Fox, he make like he ain't watchin', but he keep on hollerin', 'Hurry up dar, rabbits, I'm a waitin' on you.' En de little rabbits dey hustle roun' and wrastle wid it, but dey couldn't broke it. Bimeby dey hear little bird singin' on top er de house, en the song what dey little bird sing was dish yer: "Take you toofies and yaw it, take you toofies and saw it and yoke it, and den you kin broke it." Den little rabbits dey get mighty glad, en dey gnawed de cane mos' 'fo' over Brer Fox could git his legs on crossed. En when dey carried 'im de cane, Brer Fox he sot dar en study how he gwineter make some more 'skuse fer nabbin' 'im Mimby. He get up en git down de sifter what wuz hangin' on de wall, en holler out: "Come here, Rabs, take dish yer sifter, en run down to spring en fetch me some fresh water." De little rabbits dey run down to de spring en try to dip up de water wid de sifter, but 'cause it all run out, en it keep on runnin' out, twel bimeby de little rabbits sot down en 'gun ter cry. Den a little bird settin' up in de trees, he begun fer to sing, en dish yer's de song what he sang: "Sifter hol' water same as a tray. Ef you fill it wid white moss en dab it wid clay, de fox git madder de longer you stay. Fill it wid moss en dab it wid clay." Up dey jumped de little rabbits did, en dey fixed de sifter so 'twon't leak, en dey carry de water ter ole Brer Fox. Den Brer Fox he git mighty mad, en pint out a great big stick er wood, en tell de little rabbits fer ter put dat on de fier. De little chaps dey got roun' de wood, dey did, en dey lift at it so hard dey could see der own sins, but de wood ain't budge. Then dey heard de little bird singin', en dish yer's de song what he sang: "Spin yo' hands en tug it en toll it, en git behind it en push it en pole it. Spin yo' hands en rear back en roll it." En that's 'bout the time dey got de wood on de fier. Der daddy, he come skippin' in, en de little bird, he flewed away. Brer Fox he seed his game was up, en 'twa'n't long 'fo' he make his 'skuse en start fer ter go. "You better stay en take a snack wid me, Brer Fox," says Brer Rabbit sees. "Since Brer Wolf done quit comin' en settin' up wid me, I gittin' so I feels right lonesome dese long nights sees." But Brer Fox he button up his coat collar tight, en he's put out fer home. And now what you better do, honey, case I see Miss Sally's shatter sailing backwards and forwards fo' de winter. And the fust news you know, she'll be spectin' on you. End of section 38. Recording by Candace Stellick, Dallas, Texas.
Section 39 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by A Quiet Girl. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. Edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. Child's Play by Laura E. Richards. Once a child was sitting on a great log that lay by the roadside, playing, and another child came along and stopped to speak to him. "What are you doing?" asked the second child. "I am sailing to the southern seas," replied the first, "to get a cargo of monkeys and elephant tusks and crystal balls as large as oranges. Come up here, and you may sail with me if you like." So the second child climbed upon a log. "Look," said the first child, "see how the foam bubbles up before the ship, and trails and floats away behind. Look! The water is so clear that we can see the fishes swimming about, blue and red and green. There goes a parrotfish. My father told me about them. I should not wonder if we saw a whale in about a minute." "What are you talking about?" asked the second child peevishly. "There is no water here, only grass, and anyhow this is nothing but a log. You cannot get to islands in this way." "But we have got to them!" cried the first child. "Where are them now? I see the palm trees waving, and the white sand glittering. Look, there are the natives gathering to welcome us on the beach. They have feather cloaks, and necklaces, and anklets of copper as red as gold. Oh, and there is an elephant coming straight toward us." "I should think you would be ashamed," said the second child. "That is Widow Slocum." "It's all the same," said the first child. Presently the second child got down from the log. "I am going to play stick knife," he said. "I don't see any sense in this. I think you are pretty dull to play things that aren't really there." And he walked slowly away. The first child looked after him a moment. "I think you were pretty dull," he said to himself, "to see nothing but what is under your nose." But he was too well-mannered to say this aloud, and having taken in his cargo, he sailed for another port. End of section 39.
Section 40 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anna Hawley. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. Edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. Jamie Watt and his grandmother's tea kettle. Jamie Watt, a little Scotch boy, sat by the great open fireplace in his grandmother's kitchen. Above the rosy, glowing flames there hung an old-fashioned tea kettle. Jamie had been whittling a piece of wood and making a cart with wheels. But now he dropped his work in his lap. Something had happened to the tea kettle that caught his eye, and he began to watch it closely, for he never let anything strange pass by without finding out the reason for it. The water in the kettle had begun to boil, and a little white column of steam was puffing out from its spout. Pretty soon, the lid of the tea kettle began to rattle. Something lifted the lid right up in the air. "Oh, Grandma, Grandma," cried the boy in great excitement. "What is there inside your tea kettle?" Grandma was busy laying the table for supper. "Nothing, Jamie. There's nothing in there but water," she answered. Up popped the lid again. The boy watched it, breathless with interest. "But, Grandma, there must be something inside the kettle," he insisted. "See, something keeps lifting the lid." "Ho, ho," laughed his grandmother. Perhaps it is a brownie or a pixie you're thinking is in the kettle. No, no, it's only the steam that does the lifting. You can see clouds of it puffing out all around the lid." Now, Jamie wasn't thinking at all that it was a brownie or a pixie that was in the kettle, but he was thinking that he wanted very much to know what this thing called steam was that had so much strength and power. Carefully he leaned over and lifted the lid to look inside. Nothing at all could he see but boiling, bubbling water. "Grandma," he asked, "where does the steam come from, and how did it get into the kettle?" Grandma was used to his questions. He was always wondering about things. "Why, dearie," she answered, "steam always rises from water when water boils." The boy stood studying the kettle for a little longer. Then he sat down again, and while he was thinking and thinking, he began absent-mindedly spinning the wheels on the little cart he was making. At last he burst out, "Grandma, if the steam in the kettle is strong enough to lift the lid, why couldn't steam from a great deal more water lift much heavier things? Why couldn't it push wheels around?" Push wheels around? Grandma did not even try to answer so absurd a question. Jamie had strange and idle dreams, she thought, and she wished he would spend his time thinking of something more useful than pushing wheels around with steam. But Jamie never left off wondering about the steam just the same, nor was his wondering so idle and useless as his grandmother supposed. "That steam has the strength of a giant," he would say to himself. "If I could only find how to make use of it, it would not only lift heavy weights, but it would make all kinds of machinery go and do all sorts of work for men." So Jamie went on studying and working as he grew to be a man. Many times he made experiments with steam engines, and his engines failed to go, but he always learned something new from each failure. Other people thought him foolish and laughed at him. "Ho, ho! Jamie Watt is going to harness up the clouds that puff out of his granny's tea kettle and make them do the work of a giant," they would jeer. But in spite of all this, Jamie worked right on year after year until at last he did indeed make what no one had thought he could, a steam engine that was a success. And that was the little Scotch boy's great gift to the world. It was Jamie's engine that made possible the engines that draw trains, push steamboats, turn machinery, and do all the 101 useful things that steam engines do today. Men had lived for thousands of years beside the great giant steam, and yet not one of them ever learned how to harness it and make its mighty power of service to men. Till one small boy began to think and to question how it lifted the lid of the old tea kettle in his grandmother's kitchen. End of section 40.
Section 41 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nikki 504. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. Edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. The Bird of Paradise. A Tale of Papua New Guinea. There was once a time when the hornbill was king of the birds, and an ugly creature enough was he, with a horn on his nose no more beautiful than the horn on the nose of a rhinoceros. But the hornbill's voice was so loud that he could make more noise than all the rest of the birds put together. That is why he was king. Now one day the cockatoo came to the hornbill and said, "King, a strange bird has been seen in the heavens. His plumage is gold and emerald, and from under each shoulder there springs a tuft of golden plumes that he can raise at pleasure. When these are outspread about him, he seems not a bird at all, but a shower of molten gold in the air. A more beautiful creature never was seen. But the strange thing about him is that he seems to have no feet for the earth. Though he soars and soars in the sky above, he has never been seen to light on the earth. "What!" cried the Hornbill. "A bird in the world that does not come and bow down before me? We shall see if he has no feet for the earth. Cockatoo, do you take all your tribe and pursue him. Make him your prisoner and bring him to me." So the Cockatoo called together all his tribe and then mounted into air to give chase to the bird of paradise. Up, up, up they flew, but no matter how high they went, the bird of paradise was always above them. So at last the Cockatoos fell back, exhausted, to the earth. "We flew and we flew and we flew," said the chief Cockatoo, "but we could not one of us reach the height of the bird of paradise." At this King Hornbill flapped his wings with an angry clatter, and he raised his hoarse voice till it sounded like the braying of an ass. "Call the chief of the parrots to me," he shrieked, and when the chief of the parrots had come, he ordered him to gather all his tribe together that they might give chase to the birds of paradise. Now the parrots were vain creatures, and they were sure they could make their wings carry them higher than any of the birds had yet gone, so they set out sure of success. But while they were jerking along with great noise and commotion, straining every effort to keep their wings flapping, the bird of paradise soared silently above them, as though upborne by some power not his own, ever in motion and never needing rest. So at last the parrots, too, fell back to the earth, wearied out. "We cannot catch the bird of paradise," they reported to King Hornbill. "Some power greater than ours keep him on the wing." Then the Hornbill sent out the kingfishers and the pigeons and the flycatchers and the honeysuckers, in fact every bird in his kingdom, to give chase to the bird of paradise. But there was not one among them who could fly half so high. "If he have no feet for the earth, he must sometimes hang himself by his long-tailed feathers to rest," said the Cockatoo, and they watched continually to catch him thus. Yet no one ever saw him in constant, unwearied motion. At last, in a great rage, King Hornbill called the cassowary to him and said, "See here, you great lumbering creature, all the other birds have yet been sent up in the air to catch the bird of paradise, but you, with your 2 great feet, that you cannot lift from the earth, you cannot fly at all. Now what are you going to do for me, to bring this rebel down?" The cassowary thought a moment, and then he said, "O King, there is no need to chase him. I can tell you a better plan. He must get very little to eat, forever flying about in the sky. Bid your subjects spread out a feast for him, and so you will tempt him down from the heavens." So the honeysuckers brought honey, and the other birds brought fruit and berries and seeds and all their choicest bits of food, and they spread out their feast in an open space where the bird of paradise could see it. Come down and feast with us on the earth," they cried as they saw him appear above them. But the bird of paradise, with a warble of joy, made answer, "I am not hungry for your feast on earth. Come up and feast with me in the heavens." And he flew like a streak of sunshine up into the sky. "Then let us coax him down by offering him treasures," said the cassowary. So they heaped up a pile of necklaces and earrings of shell, teeth, bone, and feathers, and they cried, come down to earth, and all these treasures shall be yours." But the bird of paradise made answer, "I have no wish for your treasures of earth. Come up and find treasures with me in the heavens." And once again, glistening and shining, he soared away toward the sun. Now at this, what with King Hornbill's failing to bring the birds of paradise down, the other birds began to grow clamorous against him. They went whispering about among each other, till one day they rose all together with great noise and clamor, and took King Hornbill's prisoner. Then they bound him with thick vines in the dense forest, and went off screeching and shrieking to offer his crown to the bird of paradise. "O mighty bird of paradise," they cried, "come down! Come down, and you shall be our king, king of all the birds of the earth." But the bird of paradise spread out his plumes like a shower of molten gold as he hung in the sky, and he cried in a voice that rang through and through them, "Who would be king on earth, where all is clamor and strife, and you labor and toil to fly on the strength of your own poor wings? I bow to the King of the heavens, and he bears me up with a mighty power, so I soar forever and am never weary. Come down to the earth? No! Do you cease your clamor and strife and lend your wings to the King of the heavens? Then shall you be borne up above the earth, up, up to me in the sky. Come up, come up, come up!" And he mounted higher and higher and higher till he disappeared from sight. For a moment the noise on earth was stilled. Silently the birds went back to King Hornbill and released him, and never again did they try to bring the bird of paradise down. But from that day to this, every one of them is seeking to do as he bade them, to cease from clamor and strife and to serve the King of the heavens, so that they too may leave the earth behind and soar forever and ever and ever. End of section 41. Recording by Nikki 504. End of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. Edited by Olive Dupree Miller.
Section 42 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Crystal Treader. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. Edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. Doll in the Grass, a Norse Folk Tale. Once upon a time there was a king who had 12 sons. When they were grown up, he told them that they must go out into the world and find themselves wives. These wives, he commanded, must all be able to spin, weave, and make a shirt in a day, else he would not have them for daughters-in-law. He gave each of his sons a horse and a new suit of armor, so they set out into the world to look for brides. When they had traveled a bit on the way, they said that they would not take Ashiepattle, their youngest brother, with them, for he was good for nothing. So they left the poor youth behind. Ashiepattle did not know what he should do, or whither he should turn. He got off his horse, sat down in the grass, and began to weep. When he had sat there a while, lo! one of the tussocks among the grass began to stir and move, and out of it came a small white thing. Ashiepatle's mouth fell open with astonishment. But as the white thing came nearer, he saw it was a charming little lassie. Such a tiny bit of a thing, so very, very tiny. She came up to him and asked him if he would go below with her and pay a visit to the doll in the grass. Yes, he would, and so he did. When he came down below, the doll in the grass was sitting in a chair, dressed very finely and looking very beautiful. She asked Ashiepattle whither he was going and what was his errand. He told her that he was one of 12 brothers, and that the king had given them each a horse and a suit of armor, bidding them go out into the world and find themselves wives. "But," said he, "each wife must be able to spin, weave, and make a shirt in a day. If you can do that and will become my wife, I will not go a step further." So the doll in the grass set to work at once to get the shirt spun, woven, and made. But when it was done, it was so tiny, no bigger than so. Ashiepattle took it and returned home.
When he brought it out to show his father, he felt very shy because it was so small. But for all that, it was perfectly made, so the king said he would have the lady who had made it for his daughter-in-law. You can imagine how happy and joyful Ashiepattle was then. The road did not seem long to him as he set out to fetch his little bride. When he came to the doll in the grass, he wanted to take her up before him on his horse. But no, that she wouldn't. She said she would sit and drive in a silver spoon, and she had 2 small white horses which would draw her. So they set out, he on his horse and she in the silver spoon, and the horses which drew her were 2 small white mice. Ashiepattle always kept to one side of the road, so that he would not ride over her. She was so tiny. When they had travelled a bit on the way they came to a large pond. There Ashiepatle's horse shied and upset the spoon, so that the doll in the grass tumbled into the water. Ashiepattle was most sorrowful, for he did not know how he could get her out again. But after a while up came a merman with her, and now she had become just as big as any other grown-up person, and far lovelier than before. So Ashiepattle placed her before him on his horse and rode home. When he got there all his brothers had also returned, each with a bride. But though they had thought themselves so much better than Ashiepattle and left him behind, they had all chosen brides who were ugly, ill-favoured, and bad-tempered. On their heads these young misses had hats which were painted with tar and soot, and this had run down their faces, making them still uglier to behold. The king was so overjoyed with Ashiepattle and his bride that he sent the others about their business, and said Ashiepattle should be king after him. So Ashiepattle and Doll in the Grass held their wedding feast, and they lived long and happily together. End of section 42. Recording by Crystal Treader.
Section 43 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Bookhouse. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michelle Eaton. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Bookhouse. Edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. Friends by Abby Farwell Brown. How good to lie a little while and look up through the tree. The sky is like a kind big smile bent sweetly over me. The sunshine flickers through the lace of leaves above my head and kisses me upon the face like mother before bed. The wind comes stealing o'er the grass to whisper pretty things, and though I cannot see him pass, I feel his careful wings. So many gentle friends are near, whom one can scarcely see. A child should never feel a fear, wherever he may be. End of section 43.
Section 44 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Bookhouse. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Capricia Page. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Bookhouse. Edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. Cinderella. Adapted from Perrault. Once upon a time there was a gentleman who married for his second wife the proudest, vainest, and most selfish woman that ever was seen. She had 2 daughters, who were exactly like her in all things. The gentleman had also a daughter, but she was a young girl of the rarest sweetness and goodness. The mother could not bear the goodness of this young girl, because it made the pride and ill temper of her own daughters appear the more ugly. So she gave her the hardest work in the house to do, in order that none of their visitors might notice her. She had to scour the dishes, scrub the floors, and clean the whole house from top to bottom. She had to sleep in the attic, upon a wretched bed of straw, while her sisters lay in fine rooms, on the very softest beds. The young girl bore all this patiently, nor did she make her father unhappy by complaining to him of her lot. When she had done her work, she used to go into the chimney corner and sit down among the cinders. Hence, though her name was Ella, she was called by her sisters Cinderella. Cinderella had only the poorest rags for clothes, but the sweetness and goodness that shone in her face made her 100 times more beautiful than her sisters, however richly they might be dressed. It once happened that the king's son gave a very grand ball, to which all the great people of the kingdom were invited. Our young misses were highly delighted to receive an invitation. At once they began to busy themselves in choosing the gowns, petticoats, and head dresses which they should wear. The poor little Cinderella was not invited. Yet as she worked to get her sisters ready to go, they talked the whole day long of nothing but what they should do at the ball. "For my part," said the elder, "I shall wear my red velvet suit with French trimmings." "And I," said the younger, "shall wear my old skirt, but then, to make up for that, I shall put on my gold-flowered mantle and my splendid diamond stomacher." Though Cinderella was sad to think she must stay at home, she offered very sweetly to dress her sisters' hair. There was no one who could do it so well, and they gladly consented. Yet, even as she worked, they said unkind things to her. "Cinderella, don't you wish you could go to the ball? But people would surely laugh to see a Cinder girl at a ball." Cinderella made no answer. She went on arranging their hair. So at last she had them looking as well as 2 young misses could, whose faces expressed nothing but pride and ill temper. They paraded up and down before the long mirrors in their rooms, and then they got into the family coach and drove away to court. Cinderella looked after them until they were far out of sight. Then she crept into her corner by the chimney and fell softly a-crying. But Cinderella, like all good girls, was watched over by a fairy godmother, and as she sat there in tears, her good fairy appeared before her. "My dear, dear child," said the queer little old lady, "why are you crying?" I wish I could—" Cinderella could not finish for sobbing. "You wish," said the fairy, "that you could go to the ball? Is not that so?" "Yes, oh yes," answered Cinderella, sighing. "Well," said the fairy, "be but a good girl, and I will see that you go." Then she commanded the dear child to run into the garden and bring her a pumpkin. Cinderella went obediently and gathered the finest she could find, but she hadn't the smallest idea how a pumpkin could help her get to the ball. Her fairy godmother scooped out all the inside, leaving nothing but the rind. Then she struck it with her wand, and behold, the pumpkin became a splendid gilded coach. Next the fairy godmother went to look into the mouse trap, where she found 6 mice. She ordered Cinderella to lift the trap door, and as each mouse ran out, she gave it a tap with her wand. At once the mouse was changed into a horse, till before them stood 6 fine horses of a beautiful mouse-colored gray. Then she had Cinderella bring her the rat trap. In that was a very large rat with splendid whiskers, and she turned him into a coachman. Last of all she said, "Go into the garden, Cinderella, and bring me 6 lizards you will find behind the watering pot." No sooner had Cinderella done as she was commanded than the lizards became 6 footmen in gold embroidered coats. They skipped up at once behind the coach, and sat there as grandly as though they had done nothing all their lives but serve in such a position. The fairy then said to Cinderella, "Now you see a carriage fit to take you to a ball. Are you not pleased with it?" "Oh, yes," cried Cinderella, "but must I go as I am in these rags?" Her godmother simply touched her with her wand, and at the same moment her clothes were turned into cloth of gold and silver, all decked with jewels. Then the fairy gave her a pair of the prettiest glass slippers in the world, and said, as she stepped joyously into the carriage, "This one command only you must obey. Do not on any account stay at the ball after midnight. If you do, your coach will become a pumpkin again, your horses mice, your coachman a rat, your footmen lizards, and your clothes the same rags you wore before." Cinderella promised to obey, and then she drove away. The king's son, being told that a great princess whom nobody knew was come to the ball, ran out to receive her. He gave her his hand as she alighted from the carriage, and led her into the hall where the company was gathered. At once, when she appeared, there fell over all a deep silence. Everyone left off dancing, and the violins ceased to play. On all sides ladies and gentlemen whispered, "How beautiful she is!" The king's son conducted her to the seat of honor, and afterwards led her out to dance. She danced so gracefully that all admired her. She was kind and courteous too, even to her ill-tempered stepsisters, who did not for the moment recognize in this lovely princess their little cinder girl. At last a splendid feast was served, but in the midst of it all Cinderella heard the clock strike the quarter before 12. She rose and said farewell, then she hastened away as fast as she could. When she got back home she found her godmother waiting. Gratefully she thanked the little old lady for what she had done, but as she was telling her all that had happened, the two sisters knocked at the door, and the fairy changed Cinderella's brocaded gown to rags again, and disappeared in a twinkling. In her poor old clothes Cinderella opened the door. "If you had been at the ball," said one of her sisters, "you would have seen the finest, most beautiful princess that ever your eyes looked on. She was very kind to us too, and showed us much attention. But a little cinder girl like you could never even dream of such loveliness." Cinderella asked if they knew the name of the princess. "No," the stepsisters answered. "No one knows her name, but the king's son would give all in the world to learn who she is." The next night the prince asked everyone again to a ball, that he might once again see the beautiful princess. Cinderella's two sisters went, and when they were gone and the house was still, her godmother came as before and made Cinderella ready. The dress she wore on the second night was even more lovely than the one she had had at first. The king's son welcomed her with beaming eyes, and was always by her side. They danced with the same grace and beauty to the same lovely music, and they feasted as before. But when the clock struck a quarter to 12, Cinderella remembered her godmother's words and went obediently home. The third night the king's son gave still another ball. Once again the two sisters went, and after them Cinderella. Not a thing was less fine and splendid, not a person less kind and courteous than on the 2 nights preceding. Indeed, the music was so beautiful, the movements of the dance were such wonders of harmony and grace. The night was so bright, and everything was so full of joy that Cinderella never once thought how time was flying. Suddenly, the great clock of the palace began to strike 12. 1, 2, 3, 4. When she heard, Cinderella fled. Nimbly as a deer she ran. 5, 6, 7, 8. She was on the broad steps outside the palace. 9, 10. One little glass slipper fell from her foot, but she dared not stop to pick it up. 11, 12. Her clothes all turned to rags. Her coach disappeared. Mice, lizards, and rats scampered off in the darkness. As fast as she could, Cinderella ran home. All she had left of her finery was one little glass slipper, the mate to the one she had lost. In great dismay the prince ran out from the palace after her. Not a sign of her was anywhere to be seen. The guards at the gate said no splendid princess had passed them. They had seen nobody but a poorly dressed country girl, who ran as if for her life. The prince was very sorrowful, and he had a search made everywhere. But all he could find of the beautiful princess was the one little glass slipper she had dropped. For days and days he searched. Then at last he had his servitors march up and down through the length and breadth of his kingdom, giving notice with sound of trumpet that every lady in the land should try on the little glass slipper. So small it was, he knew that none but the rightful princess could wear it. Hence he gave orders that whoever could get her foot into it should come to the palace and be his bride. They began by trying the slipper on the princesses, then on the duchesses, then on the other ladies of the court. Not one of them did it fit. At last it was brought to Cinderella's two proud sisters, who each did all she could to squeeze in her foot. They pinched up their heels and drew in their toes, but in vain. Cinderella meantime stood by and watched what was going on. She knew her slipper, and when her sisters had failed, she said to them modestly, "Let me see if it will not fit me." The sisters burst out a-laughing. "Could a Cinder girl wear such a slipper?" they cried. But the messenger who was sent out on the search looked earnestly at Cinderella, and finding her very beautiful, he said it was but fair she should try it. So Cinderella sat down, and the gentleman put the slipper on her foot. Behold, it went on easily and fitted her like wax. The two sisters were dumb with amazement, but their amazement was greater still when Cinderella pulled out of her pocket the mate to that beautiful slipper. Thereupon in came her good fairy, who touched the girls' clothes with her wand, and lo! they became more magnificent than any she had worn before. And now her two sisters found her to be that beautiful lady who had been so kind to them at the ball. They threw themselves at her feet to beg pardon for all their ill treatment of her. Cinderella lifted them, kissed them, and said she forgave them with all her heart. She was conducted to the young prince, dressed as she was. He thought her more charming than ever, and a few days later led her as his bride to live with him at the palace. Cinderella, who was as good as she was beautiful, gave her two sisters a home at court. Her goodness made them ashamed of themselves, so they tried to conquer their pride and ill temper, and grow to be better young misses. End of section 44. Recording by Capricia Page.
Section 45 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Epistomelus. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. Edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. Judging by Appearances by Emily Paulson. An old jack-o'-lantern lay on the ground. He looked at the moon-man, yellow and round. The old jack-o'-lantern gazed and he gazed, and still as he looked he grew more amazed. Then said Jack-o'-lantern, "How can it be that fellow up there looks so much like me? I suppose he must be a brother of mine, and somebody cut him too from the vine. He looks very grand up there in the sky, but I know just how 'twill be by and by. He's proud of his shining, I have no doubt, but just wait until his candle goes out." End of section 45. Section 45 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Epistomelus. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. Edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. Judging by Appearances by Emily Paulson. An old jack-o'-lantern lay on the ground. He looked at the moon man, yellow and round. The old jack-o'-lantern gazed and he gazed, and still as he looked he grew more amazed. Then said Jack-o'-lantern, "How can it be that fellow up there looks so much like me? I suppose he must be a brother of mine, and somebody cut him too from the vine. He looks very grand up there in the sky, but I know just how 'twill be and by. He's proud of his shining, I have no doubt, but just wait until his candle goes out." End of section 45.
Section 46 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Verity Kendall. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. Edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. The 12 Dancing Princesses. There was once a king who had 12 beautiful daughters, and they slept in 12 beds, all in one room. When they went to bed, the doors were shut and locked, but every morning their shoes were found to be quite worn through, as if they had been danced in all night long. Yet nobody could ever find out where the maidens had been. At last the king made it known to all the land that if any young man should discover the secret, he should have the princess he liked best for his bride. But whoever tried and did not succeed after 3 nights should be driven out of the kingdom in disgrace. A king's son soon came. He was well entertained, and in the evening was taken to the chamber next to the one where the princesses lay in their 12 beds. There he was to sit and watch. In order that nothing might pass without his hearing it, the door of his chamber was left open. But the king's son soon fell asleep. When he awoke in the morning, he found that the princesses had all been dancing, for the soles of their shoes were full of holes. Yet he knew no more than before where they had been. The same thing happened the second night and the third. Each time the prince fell asleep and learned nothing, so the king ordered him to be beaten and driven out of the kingdom. After him came several others, but they all went to sleep just as he had done, and did not learn the secret, so they too were driven away in disgrace. In fact, so severely were these sons of kings punished for their failures, that soon no more presented themselves to undertake the task. Then it happened that a plain man, who was not a king's son, but was used to work for his living, came to the country where this king reigned. As he was travelling through a wood, the youth met an old woman, who asked him where he was going. "I am passing through this land looking for work," said the youth, "but I should very much like to go to the castle and find out where it is that the princesses dance. Then I might win one of them for my bride." "Well," said the dame, "that seems to be a very hard task, but this is the secret of it. Keep awake. Keep awake and watch." Then she gave him a cloak which she carried over her arm, and said, "If you are listening carefully, you will hear the noise of their going. But put on this cloak. It will make you invisible, and you will be able to go straight through the wall and follow them. Only mind you do not let sleep overcome you, or you will be lost." The youth listened well to this good counsel. Then he went to the king and said he was willing to undertake the task. He was as well received as the others had been, and the king ordered splendid royal robes to be given him in place of his plain garments. When the evening came, he was led to the outer chamber. The princesses heard him come into the room, and they laughed heartily. The eldest said, "This fellow will do as the rest have done. In a moment he will be snoring." But the youth did nothing of the kind. He waited, every moment on guard. It was about midnight when the 12 princesses rose, opened their drawers and boxes, took out all their fine clothes, dressed themselves at the glass, and skipped about, eager to begin dancing. The youth listened till he heard the noise of their preparations cease, as though they were ready to go. Then he quickly pulled on the cloak which the old woman had given him, and hurried into the chamber. Just as he arrived in the room, the eldest went up to her own bed and clapped her hands. At that the bed sank into the floor, and a trap-door flew open. Then the youth saw the 12 princesses go down through the trap-door one after another, the eldest leading the way. He followed them so closely that in the middle of the stairs along which they were passing, he trod on the gown of the youngest princess, and she cried out to her sisters, "All is not right! Someone took hold of my gown!" "You silly creature," said the eldest, "it is nothing but a nail in the wall." So down they all went, and at the bottom they found themselves in a most delightful grove of trees. The leaves were all over of silver that glittered and sparkled beautifully. The youth wished to take away some token of the place to show the king, so he broke off a little branch, and there came a noise from the tree. Then the youngest princess said again, "I am sure all is not right. Did you not hear that noise? That never happened before." But the eldest said, "It is only our princes shouting for joy at our approach." Soon they came to another grove of trees, where all the leaves were of gold, and afterwards to a third with leaves of glittering diamonds. The youth broke a branch from each, and every time he did so there came a loud snapping, which made the princess cry out that something was the matter. But in spite of her words, they all kept on till they came to a great lake. At the side of the lake there lay 12 little boats, and in the boats were 12 handsome princes, who seemed to be awaiting the princesses. One of the princesses stepped into each boat, and the youth in the coat that made him invisible got into the boat with the youngest. As they were crossing the lake, the prince who was rowing the youngest said, "I don't know why it is, but the boat seems very heavy tonight." On the other side of the lake stood a brightly lighted castle, from which came the sound of merry music. There they all landed and went into the castle. Each prince danced with his princess, and the youth, who was all the time invisible, followed the youngest about, for he found her very lovely indeed. They danced on thus till 4 o'clock in the morning, then all their shoes were worn out, so they were obliged to leave off. The princes rowed them back again over the lake, and once more the youth took his place in the boat, close beside the youngest princess. On the opposite shore the princes took leave of the maidens, the princesses promising to come again the next night. When they came to the stairs leading up into their chamber, the youth ran on ahead and laid himself in his bed, so when the 12 sisters came up more slowly, he was already asleep and snoring. "You see he has been sleeping all this time just as the others did, and has seen nothing," they said. Then they undressed themselves, put away their fine clothes, pulled off their shoes, and went to bed. In the morning the youth said nothing about what had happened, but determined to see more of this strange adventure. Again the second and third nights he followed the maidens. Everything happened just as before. The princesses danced each time till their shoes were all worn to shreds, then returned home. As soon as the time came when he must either declare the secret or be beaten out of the kingdom, he was taken before the king. With him he carried the 3 branches from the trees. When the king asked him, "Where do my 12 daughters dance at night?" he answered, "With 12 princes in a castle underground." Then he told the king all that had happened, and showed him the 3 branches of silver, gold, and diamonds. The king at once called for the princesses and asked them if what the youth said was true. When they found that their secret had been discovered, they told their father all about it. Then the king said, "My young man, it is good to be wide awake and watchful." And he asked the youth, just as he had promised, which of the maidens he would choose for his bride. The youth answered, "I will take the youngest." So he did, and they lived happily ever after. End of section 46. Recording by Verity Kendall.
Section 47 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ratandeep Satwant Singh. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. Edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. Penny Pen Pone by Laura Campbell. Penny Pen, Penny Pen, Penny Pen Pone is a little old woman who lives all alone. Her little brown house is on Ranny Wren Road. It looks like a little round tippity toad. In the little brown house is a little brown room. In the room is a chair and a bed and a broom, and a little brown table. I think that is all, except for a cupboard that stands by the wall, and a little red fire that burns in the grate, and a little blue clock that ticks early and late. Penny Pen, what do you do every day? For you live all alone and are too old to play. I rise in the morning, I rise with the sun, I poke my red fire, and I make Sally Lunn. And then I go out, and I feed my pink pig on bees and on beetles to make him grow big. And then I go round to my little front gate, and pat my dog Pim on his little brown pate. And then I go gather 100 green peas, and cook them for dinner as hot as I please. And right after dinner I lock up my house, and walk down the road in my Sunday best blouse, down Ranny Wren Road and afar, far off, to call on my little friend Nimmo the dwarf. And Nimmo and I, whatever the weather, go faring in Weeny Wen Woodland together. And the rest I can't tell, it's a secret you see, tween the Weeny Wen fairies and Nimmo and me. And at 8 by the clock I'm back in my room, a-sweeping it out with my little brown broom. Then I sit by the fire to warm my old head, and at 10 by the clock I jump right into bed. Thus spoke the old woman that lives all alone. Penny Pen, Penny Pen, Penny Pen Pone. End of section 47.
Section 48 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by TK. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. Edited by Olive Boppe Miller, the boy hero of Haarlem, a legend of Holland. Little Hans in his wooden shoes ran clattering along on the brick pavement beside a kennel in the old Dutch city of Haarlem. He was on his way to carry some beautiful gingerbread cakes, all decorated with colored seeds, to a very dear friend of his, an old man who lived some 5 miles away by the sea. Swinging his basket and whistling a merry tune, he hurried along through the quaint old marketplace, down the shady streets, and out into the country. Soon he overtook a little girl who was driving a flock of geese. "Look, boy," cried the girl, "see how swollen with water the canal is. It's almost overflowing." "Yes," answered Hans, "it is the spring rains that have done it. My father keeps the sluice gates. I'm glad that his gates are big and strong, so he can shut out the sea and keep the water from flooding all the land." The girl with the geese shivered. "Just suppose," she said, "the sea should once get through the gates or through the dikes. Where would Haarlem be then?" Neither child spoke for a moment. Each was thinking how the mossy old windmills round about, and the black and white cows that grazed so peacefully on the rich green meadows, and the neat little farmhouses, and the trim shade trees by the canal, and the people, and the whole city of Haarlem behind them, would all be swept away if once the water got through the sluice gates, or through the great thick embankments called dikes. For Holland lies much lower than the level of the ocean, and it is only by building these walls that people keep out the sea. At last Hans drew a deep breath and began to whistle again. He was a brave little fella, and seldom afraid of anything. "Don't be thinking of that, girl," he said. "The dikes and the sluice gates are watched so carefully they could never give way, so Haarlem is safe enough after all." The children trudged on together. Sometimes a little sailboat seemed to fly right over the green meadows before them. So hidden from sight was the tiny thread of candle on which it travelled. Sometimes they passed by field after field of the flaming vari-colored tulips for which Haarlem is so famous. Often they crossed little bridges over the canals. At last Hans bade the goose girl goodbye and went on his way alone. Soon he saw looming up ahead of him the grassy wall of the great sea dike, with the little house of his friend nestled down beneath it. Above, on a level with the roof of the house, just think, on a level with the roof, he saw the shining sea and the ships afloat on the water. End of section 48. The Boy Hero of Haarlem, A Legend of Holland. Recording by TK.
Section 49 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Peter Jones. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. Edited by Olive Boper Miller. The Fisherman and His Wife. Adapted from Wilhelm and Jacob Grimm. There was once upon a time a fisherman who lived with his wife in a wretched little hovel close by the sea, and every day he went out fishing. Once, as he was sitting with his rod looking at the clear water, his line suddenly went far down below, and when he drew it out, up came a big flounder. Then the flounder said to him, "Hark you, fisherman, I pray you put me back in the water. I am no common fish. I am a fish who can grant people their wishes." "Come," said the fisherman, "deliver me from a fish that talks." With that, he put the flounder back into the water, and down went the flounder to the bottom of the sea. Then the fisherman went home to his wife. "Husband," said the woman, "have you caught nothing today?" "No," said the fisherman. "I did draw up a flounder, but he said he was no common fish. He was a fish who granted people their wishes. So I put him back again into the water." "Well, and what did you wish for?" asked the woman. "Oh," said the man, "what should I wish for? I wish for nothing. I'm quite content with what I have." "Oh, you stupid good-for-nothing," said the woman. "It is surely hard to have to live always in such a wretched hovel. You might have wished for a pretty cottage for us. Go back and call the fish. Tell him we want to have a pretty cottage. He will surely give us that." The man did not quite like to go, as he could see no reason why he should trouble the fish again. But his wife insisted, so at last he went. When he reached the sea, the water was all green and yellow, and no longer so smooth as it had been before. But the fisherman stood there and said, "O fish of the sea, come listen to me, for Alice, my wife, the plague of my life, has sent me to beg a boon of thee." Up came the fish. "What does she want then?" he said. "Ah," said the man, "she says I really ought to have asked you to grant us a wish. She does not like to live in a wretched hovel any longer. She would like to have a little cottage." "Go then," said the fish. "She has it already." When the man reached home, his wife was no longer in the hovel, but in its place there stood a pretty cottage, and she was sitting on a bench before the door. She took him by the hand and said, "Just come inside. Look, now isn't this a great deal better than living as we did before?" So they went in, and there was a pretty little parlour and bedroom, and a kitchen and a pantry, all fitted up with the prettiest things. Behind the house was a small yard with hens and ducks, and a little garden with flowers and fruit. "Look," said the wife, "is not that nice?" "Yes," said the husband, "and so we must always think it. Now we shall live quite content." "Oh, I don't know about that," said the wife. With that, they had a nice little supper and went to bed. Everything went well for a week or a fortnight, and then the woman said, "Hark you, husband, this cottage and garden are far too small for us. The fish might just as well have given us a larger house. I should like to live in a great stone mansion." "Go to the fish and tell him to give us a stone mansion." "Oh, wife," said the man, This cottage is quite good enough. Why should we live in a grand house?" "What?" said the woman. "Don't you see we will be far happier in a great house than in this little cottage? Go at once." "No, wife," said the man. "The fish has just given us this cottage. I do not like to bother him again." "It'll be no bother to him at all," said she. "He will be glad to do it." The man's heart grew heavy, and he said to himself, "It is not right." And yet he went. When he came to the sea, the water was purple and beginning to darken. He stood there and said, "O fish of the sea, come listen to me, for Alice, my wife, the plague of my life, has sent me to beg a boon of thee." Up came the fish. "Well, what does she want now?" he said. "Alas," said the man, shamefaced, "she wants to live in a great stone mansion." "Go home," said the fish. "She has a mansion to live in already." Then the man went away, and when he got home, he found a great stone house, and his wife was just standing on the steps. She took him by the hand and said, "Come in." Inside there was a great hall paved with marble, and many servants who flung wide the doors. The walls were all white with beautiful hangings, and in the rooms were chairs and tables of gold. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and food of the very best kind was standing on all the tables. Behind the mansion, too, there was a great courtyard, with stables for horses and the very best of carriages. There was a magnificent large park, quite half a mile long, in which there were stags, deer, and hares, and everything that could be desired. "Come," said the woman, "isn't this beautiful?" "Yes, indeed," said the man, "and now we will live in this beautiful house and be content." "Nay, husband," said the woman, "but I'm already beginning to feel that it is not large enough. We need a palace." "Go to the fish. We must have a palace." "Oh, wife," said the man, "why do we want a palace? I do not want a palace." "Well, I do," said the wife. "Go to the fish." "But," said the man, "I do not like to ask him for anything more." "Husband," she said, "stop talking. Go." So the man went. "It is not right, it is not right," thought he, yet he went. The sea now was quite dark grey, and the waves were swelling and heaving. As he stood beside it, he called, "O fish of the sea, come listen to me, for Alice, my wife, the plague of my life, has sent me to beg a boon of thee." "What does she want now?" said the fish. "Alas," said the man, "she wants a palace." "Go home to her. She is in the palace," said the fish. So the man went, and when he came to the palace, the mansion had become much larger. It had a great tower and magnificent ornaments. A sentinel was standing before the door, and there were numbers of soldiers about, with kettle drums and trumpets. When he went inside, everything was of real marble and gold, with velvet covers and great golden tassels. Then the doors of the hall were opened, and there sat his wife in all this splendor, with rings on her fingers and jewels in her hair. On either side of her stood her maids-in-waiting in a row, each a head taller than the last. Then he went and stood before her and said, "It is very grand, wife. We can wish for nothing more." "We will see about that," said the woman. Next morning she awoke first. It was just daybreak, and from her bed she saw the beautiful country stretching out before her. "Husband," she said, "just look out over that land. Think you, couldn't you be king and rule over all that?" "Go to the fish. You must be king." "Oh, wife," said the man, "he can't make me king. Why should I be king? I do not want to be king." "Well," said the wife, "if you won't be king, I will. Go to the fish, for I will be king." "Oh, wife," said the man, "I do not like to say that to him. Why should you want to be king?" "Ask no more questions about it. I will be king. Go." So off he went, but he muttered to himself, "It will not end well. King, it is too shameless that she is not even yet content." The water rose and roared as if it were boiling and splashed upon the shore, while a high wind blew over the land, and the clouds flew and the leaves fell from the trees. Very sorrowfully, the man stood by the shore and called, "O fish of the sea, come listen to me, for Alice, my wife, the plague of my life, has sent me to ask a boon of thee." "What does she want now?" said the fish. "Alas," said the man, "she wants to be king." "Go home," said the fish, "she is king." So the man went, and when he got there, the whole palace was made of polished marble. Soldiers were marching before the door, blowing trumpets and beating cymbals and drums. And in the house, barons and dukes and princes were going about as servants. And when he entered, there sat his wife on a great golden throne. She wore on her head a great golden crown set with diamonds. In one hand she had the scepter of gold, in the other the orb of gold, and on either side of her stood the yeoman of the guard. "Well, wife, are you king now?" said he. "Yes," said she, "now I am king." "Ah, wife," said the man, "and now that you are king, do be satisfied and let well enough alone." But she looked as stiff as a post, and all she said was, "We'll see about that." Thereupon she went to bed. But she was not satisfied, and greediness let her have no sleep, for she was continually thinking what there was left for her to be that would make her greater still. At length the sun began to rise, and when the woman saw the red of dawn, she sat up in bed and looked at it. "Ah!" she cried, "I know what there is still left for me to have. I must have power over the sun and the moon. They must only be able to rise at my command. Husband," said she, poking him with her elbow, "wake up, go to the fish, for I must be ruler over the sun and the moon." The man was still half asleep, but he was so startled at her words that he rolled out of bed. He thought he must have heard amiss, and rubbed his eyes and said, "Alas, wife, what are you saying?" "Husband," she said, "if I can't order the sun and moon to rise, but have to look on and see them rise without my leave, I can't bear it. I shall not know what it is to have another happy hour unless I myself can make them rise." "Alas, wife," said the man, falling on his knees before her, "the fish cannot do that. He has made you king. I beseech you, do not ask that. Be content." Then the woman grew angry. "Go at once," said she. "I am king. I command you." So the man went. But outside a great storm was raging. It was blowing so hard he could scarcely keep his feet. The sky was black, and the sea came in with black waves all crested with black foam. The whole earth seemed to shake, and trees came falling round about. Then the man cried, but could hardly hear his own words for the noise of the storm. "O fish of the sea, come listen to me, for Alice, my wife, the plague of my life, has sent me to ask a boon of thee." "What does she want now?" said the fish, and his voice was strange and threatening. "She wants to be lord of the sun and the moon, so they dare not rise save at her command." "Go," said the fish. "She is back in the hovel." And there they live, to this very day. End of section 49.
Section 50 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ginger Cucolo. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. Edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. The Sandy Road, a Jataka Tale, by Alan C. Babbitt. Once upon a time a merchant, with his goods packed in many carts, came to a desert. He was on his way to the country on the other side of the desert. The sun shone on the fine sand, making it as hot as the top of a stove. No man could walk on it in the sunlight, but at night, after the sun went down, the sand cooled, and then men could travel upon it. So the merchant waited until after dark, and then set out. Besides the goods that he was going to sell, he took jars of water and of rice, and firewood, so that the rice could be cooked. All night long he and his men rowed on and on. One man was the pilot. He rowed first, for he knew the stars, and by them he guided the drivers. At daybreak they stopped and camped. They unyoked the oxen and fed them. They built fires and cooked rice. Then they spread a great awning over all the carts and the oxen, and the men lay down under it to rest until sunset. In the early evening they again built fires and cooked rice. After supper they folded the awning and put it away. They yoked the oxen, and as soon as the sand was cool, they started again on their journey across the desert. Night after night they traveled in this way, resting during the heat of the day. At last one morning the pilot said, "In one more night we shall get out of the sand." The men were glad to hear this, for they were tired. After supper that night the merchant said, "You may as well throw away nearly all the water and the firewood. By tomorrow we shall be in the city. Yoke the oxen and start on." Then the pilot took his place at the head of the line. But instead of sitting up and guiding the drivers, he lay down in the wagon on the cushions. Soon he was fast asleep, because he had not slept for many nights, and the light had been so strong in the daytime that he had not slept well then. All night long the oxen went on. Near daybreak the pilot awoke and looked at the last stars fading in the light. "Halt!" he cried to the drivers. "We are in the same place we were yesterday. The oxen must have turned about while I slept." They unyoked the oxen, but there was no water for them to drink. They had thrown away the water that was left the night before. So the men spread the awning over the carts, and the oxen lay down tired and thirsty. The men too lay down, saying, "The wood and water are gone. We are lost." But the merchant said to himself, "This is no time for me to sleep. I must find water. The oxen cannot go on if they do not have water to drink. The men must have water. They cannot cook the rice unless they have water. If I give up, we shall all be lost." On and on he walked, keeping close watch of the ground. At last he saw a tuft of grass. There must be water somewhere below, or that grass would not be there, he said. He ran back, shouting to the men, "Bring the spade and the hammer." They jumped up and ran with him to the spot where the grass grew. They began to dig, and by they struck a rock, and could dig no further. Then the merchant jumped down into the hole they had dug, and put his ear to the rock. "I hear water running under this rock," he called to them. "We must not give up." Then the merchant came up out of the hole and said to a serving lad, "My boy, if you give up, we are lost. You go down and try." The boy stood up straight and raised the hammer high above his head and hit the rock as hard as ever he could. He would not give in. They must be saved. Down came the hammer. This time the rock broke, and the boy had hardly time to get out of the well before it was full of cool water. The men drank as if they could never get enough, and then they watered the oxen and bathed. Then they split up their extra yokes and axles and built a fire and cooked their rice. Feeling better, they rested through the day. They set up a flag on the well for travelers to see. At sundown they started on again, and the next morning reached the city, where they sold the goods and then returned home. End of section 50. Recording by Ginger Kukalo.
Section 51 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Capricia Page. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. Edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. Rain in Summer by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. How beautiful is the rain, after the dust and heat, in the broad and fiery street. In the narrow lane, how beautiful is the rain! How it clatters along the roofs like the tramp of hoofs! How it gushes and struggles out from the throat of the overflowing spout! Across the window pane it pours and pours, and swift and wide with a muddy tide, like a river down the gutter roars the rain, the welcome rain. End of section 51. Recording by Capricia Page.
Section 52 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Pamela Krantz. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. Edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. The Story of Christopher Columbus by Elizabeth Harrison. Once upon a time, far across the great ocean, there lived a little boy named Christopher. The city in which he lived was called Genoa. It was on the coast of the great sea, and from the time that little Christopher could first remember, he had seen boats come and go across the water. I doubt not that he had little boats of his own which he tried to sail, or paddle about on the small pools near his home. Soon after he was old enough to read books, which in those days were very scarce and very much valued, he got hold of an account of the wonderful travels of a man named Marco Polo. Over and over again little Christopher read the marvelous stories told by this old traveler, of the strange cities which he had seen and of the dark-colored people whom he had met, of the queer houses, of the wild and beautiful animals he had encountered, of the jewels and perfumes and flowers which he had come across. All day long the thoughts of little Christopher were busy with this strange far-away land which Marco Polo described. All night long he dreamed of the marvelous sights to be seen on those distant shores. Many a time he went down to the water's edge to watch the queer ships as they slowly disappeared in the dim distance, where the sea and sky seemed to meet. He listened eagerly to everything about the sea and the voyages of adventure or of trade which were told by the sailors near. When he was 14 years old he went to sea with an uncle, who was commander of one of the vessels that came and went from the port of Genoa. For a number of years he thus lived on a vessel, learning everything that he could about the sea. At one time the ship on which he was sailing had a desperate fight with another ship. Both took fire and were burned to the water's edge. Christopher Columbus, for that was his full name, only escaped, as did the other sailors, by jumping into the sea and swimming to shore. Still, this did not cure him of his love for the ocean life. We find after a time that he left Italy, his native country, and went to live in Portugal, a land near the great sea, whose people were far more venturesome than had been those of Genoa. Here he married a beautiful maiden, whose father had collected a rich store of maps and charts, which showed what was then supposed to be the shape of the earth, and told of strange and wonderful voyages which brave sailors had from time to time dared to make out into the then unknown sea. Most people in those days thought it was certain death to anyone who ventured very far out on the ocean. There were all sorts of queer and absurd ideas afloat as to the shape of the earth. Some people thought it was round and flat like a pancake, and that the waters which surrounded the land gradually changed into mist and vapor, and that he who ventured out into these vapors fell through the mist and clouds down into they knew not where. Others believed that there were huge monsters living in the distant waters, ready to swallow any sailor who was foolish enough to venture near them. But Christopher Columbus had grown to be a very wise and thoughtful man, and from all he could learn from the maps of his father-in-law and the books which he read, and from the long talks which he had with some other learned men, he grew more and more certain that the world was round like an orange, and that by sailing westward from the coast of Portugal, one could gradually go round the world and find at last the wonderful land of Cathay, the strange country which lay far beyond the sea, the accounts of which had so thrilled him as a boy. We, of course, know that he was right in his belief concerning the shape of the earth, but people in those days laughed him to scorn when he spoke of making a voyage out on the vast and fearful ocean. In vain he talked and reasoned and argued and drew maps to explain matters. The more he proved to his own satisfaction that this must be the shape of the world, the more people shook their heads and called him crazy. He remembered in his readings of the book of Marco Polo's travels that the people whom he had met were heathen, who knew little about the dear God who had made the world, and nothing at all about his Son, Christ Jesus. And as Christopher Columbus loved very dearly the Christian religion, his mind became filled with a longing to carry it across the great seas to this far-away country. The more he thought about it, the more he wanted to go, until his whole life was filled with the one thought of how to get hold of some ships to prove that the earth was round, and that these far-away heathens could be reached. Through some friends he obtained admission to the court of the King of Portugal. Eagerly he told the rich monarch of the great enterprise which filled his heart. It was of little or no use. The king was busy with other affairs, and only listened to the words of Columbus as one might listen to the wind. Year after year passed by. Columbus's wife had died, and their one little son, Diego, had grown to be quite a boy. Finally Columbus decided he would leave Portugal and would go over to Spain, a rich country near by, and see if the Spanish monarchs would not give him boats in which to make his longed-for voyage. The Spanish king was named Ferdinand, and the Spanish queen was a beautiful woman named Isabella. When Columbus told them of his belief that the world was round, and of his desire to help the heathen who lived in this far-off country, they listened attentively to him, for both King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella were very earnest people and very desirous that all the world should become Christian. But their ministers and officers of state persuaded them that the whole thing was a foolish dream. And again Columbus was disappointed in his hope of getting help. Still he did not give up in despair. The thought was too great for that. He sent his brother over to England to see if the English king would not listen to him and give the necessary help. But again he was doomed to disappointment. Only here and there could he find anyone who believed that it was possible for him to sail round the earth and reach the land on the other side. Long years passed by. Columbus grew pale and thin with waiting and hoping, with planning and longing. Sometimes, as he walked along the streets of the Spanish capital, people would point their fingers at him and say, "There goes the crazy old man who thinks the world is round." Again and again Columbus tried to persuade the Spanish king and queen that if they would aid him, his discoveries would bring great honor and riches to their kingdom, and that they would also help the world by spreading the knowledge of Christ and his religion. Nobody believed in him. Nobody was interested in his plan. He grew poorer and poorer. At last he turned his back on the great Spanish court, and in silent despair he took his little son by the hand and walked a long way to a small seaport called Palos, where there was a queer old convent in which strangers were often entertained by the kind monks. Weary and footsore, he reached the gate of the convent. Knocking upon it, he asked the porter who answered the summons if he would give little Diego a bit of bread and a drink of water. While the two tired travelers were resting, as the little boy ate his dry crust of bread, the prior of the convent, a man of thought and learning, whose name was Juan Perez, came by, and at once saw that these two were no common beggars. He invited them in and questioned Columbus closely about his past life. He listened quietly and thoughtfully to Columbus and his plan of crossing the ocean and converting the heathen to Christianity. Juan Perez had at one time been a very intimate friend of Queen Isabella, in fact, the priest to whom she told all her sorrows and troubles. After a long talk with Columbus, in which he was convinced that Columbus was right, he borrowed a mule and, getting on his back, rode for many miles across the open country to the palace in which the queen was then staying. I do not know how he convinced her of the truth of Columbus's plan, when all the ministers and courtiers and statesmen about her considered it a foolish and silly dream of an old man, but somehow he did it. He then returned on his mule to the old convent at Palos, and told Columbus to go back once more to the court of Spain and again petition the queen to give him money with which to make his voyage of discovery. The state treasurer said the queen had no money to spare, but this noble-hearted woman, who now for the first time realized that it was a grand and glorious thing Columbus wished to do, said she would give her crown jewels for money with which to start Columbus on his dangerous journey across the great ocean. This meant much in those days, as queens were scarcely considered dignified if they did not wear crowns of gold, inlaid with bright jewels, on all public occasions. But Queen Isabella cared far more to send the gospel of Christ over to the heathen than how she might look, or what other people might say about her. With a glad heart Columbus hastened back to the little town of Palos, where he had left his young son with the kind priest, Juan Perez. But now a new difficulty arose. Enough sailors could not be found who would venture their lives by going out on this unknown voyage with a crazy man such as Columbus was thought to be. At last the convicts from the prisons were given liberty by the queen, on condition that they would go with the sailors and Columbus. So, you see, it was not altogether a very nice crew. Still, it was the best he could get, and Columbus's heart was so filled with the great work that he was willing to undertake the voyage, no matter how great or how many the difficulties might be. The ships were filled with food and other provisions for a long, long voyage. Nobody knew how long it would be before the land on the other side could be reached, and many people thought there was no possible hope of its ever being found. Early one summer morning, even before the sun had risen, Columbus bade farewell to the few friends who had gathered at the little seaport of Palos to say good-bye to him. The ships spread their sails and started on the great untried voyage. There were 3 boats, none of which we would think nowadays was large enough or strong enough to dare venture out of sight and help of land and run the risk of encountering the storms of mid-ocean. The names of the boats were the Santa Maria, which was the one that Columbus himself commanded, and 2 smaller boats, one named the Pinta and the other the Nina. Strange, indeed, must the sailors have felt, as hour after hour they drifted out into the great unknown waters, which no man ever ventured into before. Soon all land faded from their sight, and on and on and on they went, not knowing where or how the voyage would end. Columbus alone was filled with hope, feeling quite sure that in time he would reach the never-before-visited shores of a new world. On and on they sailed, day after day, far beyond the utmost point which sailors had ever before reached. Many of the men were filled with a strange dread and begged and pleaded to return home. Still on and on they went, each day taking them further and further from all they had ever known or loved before. Day after day passed, and week after week, until 2 months had elapsed. The provisions which they had brought with them were getting scarce. The men grew angry with Columbus and threatened to take his life if he did not command the ships to be turned back toward Spain. But his patience did not give out, nor was his faith one whit less. He cheered the hearts of the men as best he could. He promised a rich reward to the first man who should discover land. This somewhat renewed their courage. Day and night watches were set, and the western horizon before them was scanned at all hours. Time and again they thought they saw land ahead, only to find they had mistaken a cloud upon the horizon for the longed-for shore. Flocks of birds flying westward began to be seen. This gave some ground for hope, for surely the birds must be flying toward some land where they could find food, and trees in which to build their nests. Still, fear was great in the hearts of all, and Columbus knew that if land did not appear soon, his men would compel him to turn around whether he wished to or not. Then he thought of all the heathen who had never heard of God's message of love to man through Christ, and he prayed almost incessantly that courage might be given him to go on. Hour after hour he looked across the blue water, day and night, longing for the sight of land. At last, one night, as he sat upon the deck of the ship, he was quite sure that a faint light glimmered for a few moments in the distant darkness ahead. Where there is a light there must be land, he thought. Still, he was not sure. So he called one of the more faithful sailors to him and asked him what he saw. The sailor exclaimed, "A light! A light!" Another sailor was called, but by this time the light had disappeared, so the sailor saw nothing, and Columbus's hopes again sank. About 2 o'clock that night the commander of one of the other boats started the cry, "Land! Land ahead!" You can well imagine how the shout was taken up, and how the sailors, one and all, rushed to the edge of their ships, leaning far over, and straining their eyes for the almost unhoped-for sight. Early the next morning some one of the sailors picked up a branch of a strange tree, lodged in the midst of which was a tiny bird's nest. This was sure evidence that they were indeed near land, for branches of trees do not grow in water. Little by little the land came in sight. First it looked like a dim ghost of a shore, but gradually it grew distinct and clear. About noon the next day the keel of Columbus's boat ground upon the sand of the newly discovered country. No white man had ever before set eyes upon it. No ship had ever before touched this coast. At last, after a long life of working and studying, of hoping and planning, of trying and failing, and trying yet again, he had realized his dream. The great mystery of the ocean was revealed, and Columbus had achieved a glory which would last as long as the world lasted. He had given a new world to mankind. He had reached the far distant country across the ocean, which scarcely any of his countrymen had even believed to have any existence. He now knew that the whole round world could in time have the Christian religion. He sprang upon the shore, and dropping on his knees, he first stooped and kissed the ground, and then he offered a fervent prayer of thanks to God. A learned man who had come with him across the water next planted the flag of Spain upon the unknown land, and claimed the newly discovered country in the name of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. Wonderful, wonderful indeed were the things which Columbus and the sailors now saw. Strange, naked men and women of a copper or bronze color. Strange new birds with gorgeous tails that glittered like gems, such as they had never seen before. Beautiful and unknown fruits and flowers met their gaze on every side. The savages were kind and gentle, and brought them food and water. Do you know, my dear children, that this strange, wild, savage country which Columbus had traveled so far and so long to discover was our country, America? End of section 52. Recording by Pamela Krantz. Section 53 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Pamela Krantz. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. Edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. In Columbus's Time, by Annette Wynne. Suppose you lived then, do you think that you would believe what Columbus said was true? Or would you be like the wise men, who laughed in his face and said, "Pooh! Pooh!" End of section 53. Recording by Pamela Krantz.
Section 54 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Eden Ray Hedrick. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. Edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. Section 54. Farewell to the Farm, by Robert Louis Stevenson. The coach is at the door at last. The eager children, mounting fast, and kissing hands, in chorus sing, "Good-bye, good-bye, to everything." To house and garden, field and lawn, the meadow gates we swang upon, to pump and stable, tree and swing, "Good-bye, good-bye, to everything." And fare ye well for evermore, O ladder at the hayloft door, O hayloft where the cobwebs cling, Goodbye, goodbye to everything. Crack goes the whip, and off we go. The trees and houses smaller grow. Last, round the woody turn we swing. Goodbye, goodbye to everything. End of section 54.
Section 55 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Grace Garrett. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House, edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. Christening the Baby in Russia, by Arthur Ransome. Somewhere, in the forest of great trees, a forest so big that the forests of England are little woods beside it, is the hut where old Peter lives. The hut was made of pine logs cut from the forest. You could see the marks of the axe. Old Peter was the grandfather of Maroosia and Vanya. He lived alone with them in the hut in the forest, and they were happy with old Peter, who was very kind to them, and did all he could to keep them warm and well fed. Besides old Peter and Maroosia and Vanya, there were Vladimir and Bayan. Vladimir was a cat, a big black cat, as stately as an emperor, and just now he was lying in Vanya's arms fast asleep. Bayan was a dog, a tall grey wolf dog. He could jump over the table with a single bound. When he was in the hut he usually lay underneath the table, because that was the only place where he could lie without being in the way, and of course at meal times he was in the way even there. Just now he was out with old Peter. Vladimir stirred suddenly in Vanya's lap, and a minute later they heard the scrunch of boots. Then the door opened, and Bayan pushed his way in and shook himself, and licked Maroosia and Vanya, and startled Vladimir, and lay down under the table, and came out again, because he was so pleased to be home. And old Peter came in after him. "You are snug in here, little pigeons," he said. Vanya and Maroosia had jumped up to welcome him, and when he opened his big sheepskin coat, they tumbled into it together and clung to his belt. Then he closed the big woolly coat over the top of them, and they squealed, and he opened it a little way and looked down at them over his beard, and then he closed it again for a moment before letting them out. He did this every night, and Bayan always barked when they were shut up inside. Then old Peter took his big coat off, and lifted down the samovar from the shelf. The samovar is like a big tea urn, with a red-hot fire in the middle of it, keeping the water boiling. It hums like a bee on the tea-table, and the steam rises in a little jet from the tiny hole in the top. The boiling water comes out of a tap in the bottom. Old Peter threw in lighted sticks and charcoal, and made a draught to draw the heat, and then set the samovar on the table with a little fire crackling in its inside. Then he cut some big lumps of black bread. Then he took a great saucepan full of soup that was simmering on the stove, and emptied it into a big wooden bowl. Then he went to the wall where, on 3 nails, hung 3 wooden spoons, deep like ladles. There were 1 big spoon for old Peter, and 2 little spoons, 1 for Vanya and 1 for Maroosia. And all the time that old Peter was getting supper ready, he was answering questions and making jokes, old ones of course, that he made every day, about what the man in the moon said when he fell out, and what the wolf said who caught his own tail and ate himself up before he found out his mistake. And Vanya and Maroosia danced about the hut and chuckled. Then they had supper, all 3 dripping their wooden spoons in the big bowl together, and eating a tremendous lot of black bread. And of course there were scraps for Vladimir and a bone for Bayan. After that they had tea with sugar but no milk, because they were Russians and liked it that way. Old Peter had a sister who lived in the village not so very far from the forest, and she had a plump daughter, and the daughter was called Nastasia, and she was married to a handsome peasant called Sergey, who had 3 cows, a lot of pigs, and a flock of fat geese. And tonight old Peter said to the children, "There's something new in the village." "What sort of a something?" asked Vanya. "Alive," said old Peter. "Is there a lot of it?" asked Vanya. "No, only 1." "Then it can't be pigs," said Vanya, in a melancholy voice. "I thought it was pigs." "Perhaps it is a little calf," said Maroosia. "I know what it is," said Vanya. "Well?" "It's a foal. It's brown all over with white on its nose, and a lot of white hairs in its tail." No. What is it then, grandfather? I'll tell you, little pigeons. It's small and red, and it's got a bumpy head with hair on it like the fluff of a duckling. It has blue eyes and 10 fingers to its forepaws and 10 toes to its hind feet, 5 to each. It's a baby, said Maroosia. Yes. Nastasia has got a little son, Aunt Sophia has got a grandson, and you have got a new cousin, and I've got a new grandnephew. The children had jumped up as soon as they knew it was a baby. When is the christening? The day after tomorrow. Oh, grandfather! Well? Who is going to the christening? The baby, of course. Yes, but other people? All the village. And us? I have to go, and I suppose there'll be room in the cart for 2 little bear cubs like you. And so it was settled that Vanya and Maroosia were to go to the christening of their new cousin. All the next day they could think of nothing else, and early on the morning of the christening they were up and about, Maroosia seeing that Vanya had on a clean shirt, and herself putting a green ribbon in her hair. The sun shone, and the leaves on the trees were all new and bright, and the sky was pale blue through the flickering green leaves. Old Peter was up early too, harnessing the little yellow horse into the old cart. The cart was of rough wood, without springs, like a big box, fixed on a long larch poles between 2 pairs of wheels. The larch poles did instead of springs, bending and creaking as the cart moved over the forest track. The shafts came from the front wheels upwards to the horse's shoulders, and between the ends of them there was a tall, strong hoop of wood, called a duga, which rose high over the shoulders of the horse, above his collar, and had 2 little bells hanging from it at the top. The wooden hoop was painted green, with little red flowers. The harness was mostly ropes, but that did not matter so long as it held together. The horse had a long tail and mane, and looked as untidy as a little boy, but he had a green ribbon in his forelock in honor of the christening, and he could go like anything, and never got tired. When all was ready, old Peter arranged a lot of soft, fresh hay in the cart for the children to sit in. Hay is the best thing in the world to sit in when you drive in a jolting Russian cart. Old Peter put in a tremendous lot, so that the horse could eat some of it while waiting in the village, and yet leave them enough to make them comfortable on the journey back. Presently Vanya and Maroosia were tucked into the hay, and old Peter climbed in with the plaited reins, and away they went along the narrow forest track, where the wheels followed the ruts and splashed through deep holes, for the spring was young, and the roads had not yet dried. Some of the deepest holes had a few pine branches laid in them, but that was the only road mending that was ever done. Overhead were tall firs and silver birches with their little pale round leaves, and somewhere not far away a cuckoo was calling, while the murmur of the wild pigeons never stopped for a moment. They drove on through the forest, and at last came out from among the trees into an open country, a broad, flat plain stretching to the river. Far away they could see the big, square tail of a boat, swelling out of the light wind, and they knew that there was the river, on the banks of which stood the village. They could see a small clump of trees, and as they came nearer, the pale green cupolas of the white village church rising above the tops of the birches. They passed a little girl with a flock of geese, and another little girl lying in the grass, holding a long rope which was fastened to the horns of a brown cow. And the little girl lay on her face and slept among the flowers while the cow walked slowly round her, step by step, chewing the grass and thinking about nothing at all. And at last they came to the village, where the road was wider, and instead of 1 pair of ruts there were dozens, and the cart bumped worse than ever. The broad earthy road had no stones in it, and in places where the puddles would have been deeper than the axles of the wheels, it had been mended by laying down fir logs and small branches in the puddles, and putting a few spadefuls of earth on top of them. The road ran right through the village. On either side of it were little wooden huts. The ends of the timbers crossed outside at the 4 corners of the huts. They fitted neatly into each other, and some of them were carved. And there were no slates or tiles on the roofs, but little slips of wood overlapping each other. There was not a single stone hut or cottage in the village. Only the church was partly brick, whitewashed, with bright green cupolas up in the air, and thin gold crosses on the tops of the cupolas, shining in the clear sky. Outside the church were rows of short posts, with long fir timbers nailed on top of them, to which the country people tied their horses when they came to church. There were several carts there already, with bright-coloured rugs lying on the hay in them, and the horses were eating hay or biting the logs. Always, except when the logs were quite new, you can tell the favourite places for tying up the horses to them, because the timbers will have deep holes in them, where they have been gnawed away by the horses' teeth. They bite the timbers, while their masters eat sunflower seeds, not for food, but to pass the time. "Now then," said old Peter, as he got down from the cart, tied the horse, gave him an armful of hay from the cart, and lifted the children out. "Be quick! We shall be late if we don't take care. I believe we are late already." Old Peter hurried into the church, followed by Vanya and Maroosia. The ceremony was just beginning. The priest, in his silk robes, was standing before the gold and painted screen at the end of the church, and there were the basin of holy water, and old Peter's sister, and the nurse Babka Tanya, very proud, holding the baby in a roll of white linen, and rocking it to and fro. There were coloured pictures of saints all over the screen, which stretches from one side of the church to the other. Some of the pictures were framed in gilt frames under glass, and were partly painted and partly metal. The faces and hands of the saints were painted, and their clothes were glittering silver or gold. Little lamps were burning in front of them, and candles. A Russian christening is very different from an English one. For one thing, the baby goes right into the water, not once, but 3 times. Babka Tanya unrolled the baby, and the priest covered its face with his hands, and down it went under the water, once, twice, and again. Then he took some of the sacred ointment on his finger, and anointed the baby's forehead, and feet, and hands, and little round stomach. Then, with a pair of scissors, he cut a little pinch of fluff from the baby's head, and rolled it into a pellet with the ointment, and threw the pellet into the holy water. And after that the baby was carried solemnly 3 times round the holy water. The priest blessed it and prayed for it, and there it was, a little true Russian, ready to be carried back to its mother, Nastasia, who lay at home in her cottage waiting for it. When they got outside the church, they all went to Nastasia's cottage to congratulate her on her baby. Nastasia smiled at Vanya and Maroosia, but they had no eyes except for the baby, and for all that belonged to it, especially its cradle. Now a Russian baby has a much finer cradle than an English baby. A long fir pole is fastened in the middle, and at one end to the beams in the ceiling of the hut, so that the other end swings free, just below the rafters. From this end is hung a big basket, and on the ropes by which the basket hangs are fastened shawls of bright colours. The baby is tucked in the basket, the shawls closed around it, and as the mother or the nurse sits at her spinning, she just kicks the basket gently now and again, and it swings up and down from the end of the pole, as if it were hung from the branch of a tree. There was a samovar already steaming in the cottage, and a great cake of pastry, and cabbage and egg and fish, and there were cabbage soup with sour cream, and black bread and a little white bread, and red kisel jelly, and a huge jug of milk, and everybody ate and drank and talked as if they were never going to stop. At last, towards evening, old Peter packed what was left of the hay into the cart, and packed Vanya and Maroosia in with the hay. Everybody said good-byes all round, and Peter climbed in and took up the rope reins. Vanya and Maroosia waved their heads, and off they drove, back again to the hut in the forest. End of section 55. Section 56 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Grace Garrett. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. Edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. The Birches by Walter Pritchard Eaton. The little birches, white and slim, gleaming in the forest dim, must think the day is almost gone, for each one has her nightie on. End of section 56.
Section 57 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Maricel Cui. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. Edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. The Little Snow Maiden, a Russian Folktale. There was once a good man named Peter who lived with his wife Anastasia in a little village on the edge of the forest. Now these two, though there was much merry company in the huts about them, were always sorrowing because they had no children in their home. The woman never had to run to her door and peep out to see that her little one did not wander away because she had no little one. So Peter and Anastasia would stand at their window and watch the neighbors' children and wish with all their hearts that one of these was their own. One day they saw the little ones in their sheepskin coats playing in the snow. They made snow forts and pelted each other with snowballs and laughed and shouted merrily. Then they rolled up the snow into a great snow woman and put an old kerchief on her head and an old shawl about her shoulders. "Now there's an idea, wife," said Peter. "Let us go out and make a little snow girl. Who knows, perhaps she will come alive and be a daughter to us." "Good," says the wife. "It's worth trying at least." So out went the two in their big coats and their fur hats, and there in the backyard where no one could see them they set to work. They rolled the snow together and began to fashion it into a little maiden. And so long had they tenderly dreamed of a little girl that their great love fashioned her now, a most beautiful creature, the loveliest ever seen. Well, towards evening, when the sky was opal and smoke color and the clouds lay purple on the edge of the earth, she was finished. There she stood before them, complete. "Oh, my little white pigeon, speak to us," says Peter. "Yes, speak, my darling," says Anastasia, "and run and skip and laugh like the other children." Suddenly, in the twilight glow, the little maid's eyelids began to quiver. A faint flush bloomed on her cheeks. Her lips parted in a smile. Then her eyes opened, and lo! they were blue as the sky at noon. All at once she skipped from her place and began dancing about in the snow, dancing like a little white sprite and laughing softly, dancing like snowflakes whirled in the wind. "God be thanked," says Peter. "Now we have a little girl to live with us. Run, wife, and fetch a blanket to keep her warm." So Anastasia ran and got a blanket and wrapped it about the little snow maid, and Peter picked her up and carried her into the house. "You must not keep me too warm," she said. So Peter put her gently down on a bench farthest from the stove, and she smiled up at him and blew him a kiss. Then Anastasia got her a little white fur coat, and Peter went to the neighbors and bought her a white fur cap and a pair of little white boots with white fur around the tops. But when she was dressed, the little snow maiden cried, "It is too hot here in the cottage. I must go out into the cold." "Nay, nay, little pigeon," says Anastasia. "It is time I tucked you up warm in bed." "Oh, no, no," says the little snow maiden. "I am a little daughter of the snow. I cannot be tucked up under a blanket. I will play by myself in the yard all night." And out she danced into the cold. Over the gleaming snow she tripped, down the silver path of the moonlight. Her garments glittered like diamonds, and the frost shone about her head like a little crown of stars. For a long time the man and his good wife watched her. "Ah, God be thanked for the little girl that has come to us," they said again and again. Then at last they went to bed. But more than once that night they rose to look out of the window and make sure she had not run away. There she was, just as before, dancing about in the moonlight and playing all alone. In the morning she ran into the cottage with shining eyes. "This is the porridge for me," she cried, and she showed the good woman how to crush up a little piece of ice in a wooden bowl, for that was all she would eat. After breakfast she ran out into the road and joined the other children at play. How she played, and how the children loved her! She could run faster than all the rest. Her little white boots twinkled and gleamed as she ran, and when she laughed, it was like the ringing peals of tiny silver bells. The man and the woman watched her and were very proud. "She is all our own," said Anastasia. "Our little white pigeon," said Peter. When it was time, she came in for her ice porridge, but though Anastasia said to her, "Tonight you'll surely sleep inside, my darling," she answered just as before, "Oh, no, no, I am a little daughter of the snow." Thus it went all through the winter. The little snow maiden made Peter and Anastasia very happy. She was forever singing and laughing and dancing, in and out of the house, in and out of the house. She was very good too, and she did everything Anastasia told her. Only she would never sleep indoors. She seemed happiest and most at home when the little snowflakes were dancing about in the air, and no storm was ever too severe to seem other than her playfellow. But when there began to be signs of spring in the air, when the snow melted and one could run down the paths in the forest, when tiny green shoots peeped up here and there, then the little snow girl seemed to be drooping and longing for something. One day she came to Peter and Anastasia and said, "Time has come when I must go to my friends of frost and snow. Goodbye, dear ones here, goodbye. Back I go across the sky." Peter and Anastasia began to weep and lament very loudly. They wished to keep her all to themselves and not to share her with anyone. "Ah, my darling, you must not go," cried Peter. "Ah, my darling, you shall not go," cried Anastasia. And Peter ran and barred the door, while Anastasia put her arms about her darling and held her close beside the stove. "You shall not leave us, you shall not leave us," they cried. But even as Anastasia held her tight, she seemed to melt slowly away. At last there was nothing left but a pool of water by the stove, with a little fur cap in the midst, and a little fur coat and boots. Yet it seemed to Anastasia and Peter as though they saw her still before them, with her bright eyes shining, her long hair streaming, and heard her still faintly singing, "Time has come when I must go to my friends of frost and snow. Goodbye, dear ones here, goodbye. Back I go across the sky." "Oh, stay, stay, stay," they begged. But all at once the very door that Peter had barred burst open. A cold wind swept into the room, and when Peter had pushed the door shut again, lo, the little snow maiden had vanished. Then Peter and Anastasia wept and thought they should never see her again. Anastasia carefully laid away the garments she had left behind, and often through the summer she took out the little fur cap, the fur coat, and the boots, to kiss them and think of her darling. But when winter had come again, it happened one starlit night that the two heard a silvery peal of laughter just outside the window. "That sounds like our little snow maid," cried Peter, and off he hurried to open the door. Sure enough, into the room she danced again, her eyes as shining as ever, and she sang, "By frosty night and frosty day, your love calls me here to stay. Here till spring I stay, and then back to frost and snow again." So Peter and Anastasia clasped the little snow maid in their arms. She put on her pretty white clothes again, and soon there she was out on the gleaming snow, tripping down the silver path of the moonlight, her garments glittering like diamonds, and the frost about her head like a crown of shining stars. Each springtime off she went northward to play through the summer with her friends on the frozen seas, but every winter she stayed in Russia with Peter and Anastasia, and they came not to mind her going, for they knew she would come again. End of section. Section 58 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House, edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. Boots and His Brothers, by Sir George Webb Descent. Once on a time, there was a man who had 3 sons, Peter, Paul, and John. John was Boots, of course, because he was the youngest. I can't say the man had anything more than these 3 sons, for he hadn't one penny to rub against another. And so he told his sons over and over again they must go out into the world and try to earn their bread, for there at home there was nothing to be looked for but starving. Now a bit off the man's cottage was the king's palace, and you must know, just against the king's windows a great oak had sprung up, which was so stout and big that it took away all the light from the king's palace. The king had said he would give many, many dollars to the man who could fell the oak, but no one was man enough for that, for as soon as ever one chip of the oak's trunk flew off, 2 grew in its stead. A well, too, the king would have dug, which was to hold water for the whole year, for all his neighbors had wells, but he hadn't any, and that he thought a shame. So the king said he would give any one who dug him such a well as would hold water for a whole year round, both money and goods. But no one could do it, for the king's palace lay high, high up on a hill, and they hadn't dug a few inches before they came upon the living rock. But as the king had set his heart on having these 2 things done, he had it given out far and wide, in all the churches of his kingdom, that he who could fell the big oak in the king's courtyard, and get him a well that would hold water the whole year round, should have the princess and half the kingdom. Well, you may easily know there was many a man who came to try his luck, but for all their hacking and hewing, and all their digging and delving, it was no good. The oak got bigger and stouter at every stroke, and the rock didn't get softer either. So one day those 3 brothers thought they'd set off and try too, and their father hadn't a word against it, for even if they didn't get the princess and half the kingdom, it might happen they might get a place somewhere with a good master, and that was all he wanted. So when the brothers said they thought of going to the palace, their father said yes at once. So Peter, Paul, and Jack went off from their home. Well, they hadn't gone far before they came to a fir wood, and up along one side of it rose a steep hillside, and as they went, they heard something hewing and hacking away up on the hill among the trees. "I wonder now what it is that is hewing away up yonder," said Jack. "You're always so clever with your wonderings," said Peter and Paul both at once. "What wonder is it, pray, that a woodcutter should stand and hack up on a hillside?" "Still, I'd like to see what it is, after all," said Jack. And up he went. "Oh, if you're such a child, it will do you good to go and take a lesson," bawled out his brothers after him. But Jack didn't care for what they said. He climbed the steep hillside towards where the noise came, and when he reached the place, what do you think he saw? Why, an axe that stood there, hacking and hewing all of itself at the trunk of a fir. "Good day," said Jack. "So you stand here all alone and hew, do you?" "Yes, here I've stood and hewed and hacked a long, long time, waiting for you," said the axe. "Well, here I am at last," said Jack, as he took the axe, pulled it off its haft, and stuffed both head and haft into his wallet. So when he got down again to his brothers, they began to jeer and laugh at him. "And now what funny thing was it you saw up yonder on the hillside?" they said. "Oh, it was only an axe we heard," said Jack. So when they had gone a bit farther, they came under a steep spur of rock, and up there they heard something digging and shoveling. "I wonder now," said Jack, "what it is digging and shoveling up yonder at the top of the rock." "Ah, you're always so clever with your wonderings," said Peter and Paul again, as if you'd never heard a woodpecker hacking and pecking at a hollow tree. "Well, well," said Jack, "I think it would be a piece of fun just to see what it really is." And so off he set to climb the rock, while the others laughed and made game of him. But he didn't care a bit for that. Up he clomb, and when he got near the top, what do you think he saw? Why, a spade that stood there digging and delving. "Good day," said Jack. "So you stand here all alone and dig and delve?" "Yes, that's what I do," said the spade. "And that's what I've done this many a long day, waiting for you." "Well, here I am," said Jack again, as he took the spade and knocked it off its handle and put it into his wallet, and then went down again to his brothers. "Well, what was it so rare and strange," said Peter and Paul, "that you saw up there at the top of the rock?" "Oh," said Jack, "nothing more than a spade. That was what we heard." So they went on again a good bit, till they came to a brook. They were thirsty, all three, after their long walk, and so they lay down beside the brook to have a drink. "I wonder now," said Jack, "where all this water comes from." "I wonder if you're right in your head, where the brook comes from, indeed," said Peter and Paul in one breath. "If you're not mad already, you'll go mad very soon with your wonderings. Have you never heard how water rises from a spring in the earth?" "Yes, but still, I've a great fancy to see where this brook comes from," said Jack. So up alongside the brook he went, in spite of all that his brothers bawled after him. Nothing could stop him. On he went. So as he went up and up, the brook got smaller and smaller, and at last, a little way farther on, what do you think he saw? Why, a great walnut, and out of that the water trickled. "Good day," said Jack again. "So you lie here and trickle and run down all alone?" "Yes, I do," said the walnut. "And here have I trickled and run this many a long day, waiting for you." "Well, here I am," said Jack, as he took up a lump of moss and plugged up the hole, that the water might not run out. Then he put the walnut into his wallet and ran down to his brothers. "Well now," said Peter and Paul, "have you found out where the water comes from? A rare sight it must have been." "Oh, after all, it was only a hole it ran out of," said Jack. And so the others laughed and made game of him again, but Jack didn't mind that a bit. "After all, I had the fun of seeing it," he said. So when they had gone a bit farther, they came to the king's palace. But as every one in the kingdom had heard how they might win the princess and half the realm, if they could only fell the big oak and dig the king's well, so many had come to try their luck, that the oak was twice as stout and big as it had been at first, for 2 chips grew for every one they hewed out with their axes, as I dare say you all bear in mind. So the king had now laid it down as a punishment, that if any one tried and couldn't fell the oak, he should be put on a barren island, and both his ears were to be clipped off. But the 2 brothers didn't let themselves be scared by that. They were quite sure they could fell the oak, and Peter, as he was the eldest, was to try his hand first. But it went with him as with all the rest who had hewn at the oak. For every chip he cut out, 2 grew in its place. So the king's men seized him, and clipped off both his ears, and put him out on the barren island. Now Paul, he was to try his luck, but he fared just the same. When he had hewn 2 or 3 strokes, they began to see the oak grow, and so the king's men seized him too, and clipped his ears, and put him off on the island. So now Jack was to try. "If you will look like a marked sheep, we're quite ready to clip your ears at once, and then you'll save yourself some bother," said the king, for he was angry with him for his brother's sake. "Well, I'd like just to try first," said Jack, and so he got leave. Then he took his axe out of his wallet and fitted it to its haft. "Hew away," he said to his axe, and away it hewed, making the chips fly again, so that it wasn't long before down came the oak. When that was done, Jack pulled out his spade and fitted it to its handle. "Dig away," he said to the spade, and so the spade began to dig and delve till the earth and rock flew out in splinters, and so he had the well soon dug out, you may think. And when he had got it as big and deep as he chose, Jack took out his walnut and laid it in one corner of the well, and pulled the plug of moss out. "Trickle and run," said Jack, and so the nut trickled and ran till the water gushed out of the hole in a stream, and in a short time the well was brimful. Then Jack had felled the oak which shaded the king's palace, and dug a well in the palace yard, and so he got the princess and half the kingdom, as the king had promised. Every one said, well, after all, Jack wasn't so much out of his mind when he took to wandering. End of section. Recording by Maricel Cui.
Section 59 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Grace Garrett. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. Edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. A Romanian Folk Song. Sleep, my darling, sleep an hour. Grow thou as the gillyflower. As a teardrop be thou white, as a willow, tall and slight, gentle as the ringdoves are, and be as lovely as a star. End of section 59.
Section 60 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Eden Ray Hedrick. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. Edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. Section 60. The Selfish Giant by Oscar Wilde. Every afternoon, as they were coming home from school, the children used to go and play in the giant's garden. It was a lovely, large garden, with soft green grass. Here and there over the grass stood beautiful flowers like stars, and there were 12 peach trees that in the springtime broke out into delicate blossoms of pink and pearl, and in the autumn bore rich fruit. The birds sat on the trees and sang so sweetly that the children used to stop their games in order to listen to them. "How happy we are here!" they cried to each other. One day the giant came back. He had been to visit his friend the Cornish ogre, and had stayed with him for 7 years. After the 7 years were over, he had said all that he had to say, for his conversation was limited, and he determined to return to his own castle. When he arrived he saw the children playing in the garden.
"What are you doing here?"
he cried in a very gruff voice, and the children ran away.
"My own garden is my own garden,"
said the giant.
"Anyone can understand that, and I will allow nobody to play in it but myself."
So he built a high wall all round it, and put up a notice board.
"Trespassers will be prosecuted."
He was a very selfish giant. The poor children had now nowhere to play. They tried to play on the road, but the road was very dusty and full of hard stones, and they did not like it. They used to wander round the high wall when their lessons were over, and talk about the beautiful garden inside. "How happy we were there," they said to each other. Then the spring came, and all over the country there were little blossoms and little birds. Only in the garden of the selfish giant it was still winter. The birds did not care to sing in it, as there were no children, and the trees forgot to blossom. Once a beautiful flower put up its head from the grass, but when it saw the notice board it was so sorry for the children that it slipped back into the ground again and went off to sleep. The only people who were pleased were the snow and the frost. "Spring has forgotten this garden," they cried, "so we will live here all the year round." The snow covered up the grass with her white cloak, and the frost painted all the trees silver. Then they invited the North Wind to stay with them, and he came. He was wrapped in furs, and he roared all day about the garden, and blew the chimney pots down. "This is a delightful spot," he said. "We must ask the hail on a visit." So the hail came. Every day for 3 hours he rattled on the roof of the castle till he broke most of the slates, and then he ran round and round the garden as fast as he could go. He was dressed in grey, and his breath was like ice.
I cannot understand why the spring is so late in coming,
said the selfish giant, as he sat at the window and looked out at his cold, white garden.
I hope there will be a change in the weather.
But the spring never came, nor the summer. The autumn gave golden fruits to every garden, but to the giant's garden she gave none. "He is too selfish," she said. So it was always winter there, and the north wind and the hail and the frost and the snow danced about through the trees. One morning the giant was lying awake in bed when he heard some lovely music. It sounded so sweet to his ears that he thought it must be the king's musicians passing by. It was really only a little linnet singing outside of his window, but it was so long since he had heard a bird sing in his garden that it seemed to him to be the most beautiful music in the world. Then the hail stopped dancing over his head, and the north wind ceased roaring, and a delicious perfume came to him through the open casement.
I believe the spring has come at last,
said the giant, and he jumped out of bed and looked around. What did he see? He saw a most wonderful sight. Through a little hole in the wall the children had crept in, and they were sitting in the branches of the trees. In every tree that he could see there was a child, and the trees were so glad to have the children back again that they covered themselves with blossoms, and were waving their arms gently about the children's heads. The birds were flying about and twittering with delight, and the flowers were looking up through the green grass and laughing. It was a lovely scene, only in one corner it was still winter. It was the furthest corner of the garden, and in it was standing a little boy. He was so small that he could not reach up to the branches of the tree, and he was wandering all around it, crying bitterly. The poor tree was still quite covered with frost and snow, and the north wind was blowing and roaring above it. "Climb up, little boy," said the tree, and it bent its branches down as low as it could. But the boy was too tiny, and the giant's heart melted as he looked out.
How selfish I have been,
he said.
Now I know why the spring would not come here. I will put that poor little boy on the top of the tree, and then I will knock down the wall, and my garden shall be the children's playground for ever and ever.
He was really very sorry for what he had done. So he crept downstairs and opened the front door quite softly, and went out into the garden. But when the children saw him they were so frightened that they all ran away, and the garden became winter again. Only the little boy did not run, for his eyes were so full of tears that he did not see the giant coming. And the giant stole up behind him, and took him gently in his hand, and put him up into the tree. And the tree broke at once into blossom, and the birds came and sang on it, and the little boy stretched out his 2 arms and flung them round the giant's neck and kissed him. And the other children, when they saw that the giant was not wicked any longer, came running back, and with them came the spring.
"It is your garden now, little children,"
said the giant, and he took a great axe and knocked down the wall. And when the people were going to market at 12 o'clock, they found the giant playing with the children in the most beautiful garden they had ever seen. End of section 60.
Section 61 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michelle Eaton. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. Edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. Elsa and the 10 Elves. A Swedish fairy tale. Once upon a time, there was a pretty sweet-tempered little girl named Elsa. She lived on a farm, but her father, who was very proud of her, sent her to school in the city. There she learned reading, writing, singing, dancing, and a number of other pretty accomplishments, but she did not learn how to cook, sew, or care for a house. The truth of the matter was that Elsa was lazy and did not like anything that she called work. When she grew older, many young men wished her for a wife, but among them all she chose her neighbour Gunnar, a handsome, industrious young farmer. So the two were married and went to live on Gunnar's farm. At first they were very happy, but as the days passed, and Elsa did not direct the servants in their work, or see that the house was kept in order, everything went wrong. The provisions in the storerooms were tumbled about, food was found missing, and the house was dirty. Poor Gunnar was miserable, but he loved Elsa too much to say a word to her about it. The day before Christmas came. The sun had been up and people bustling about the house for hours. Still Elsa lay fast asleep in her bed. At last a servant came into her room. "Oh, mistress," she said, "the master and his men are ready to set off for the woods. They are waiting for us to make ready their luncheon. What shall we pack in their lunch bags?" "Don't talk to me," said Elsa sleepily. "Leave the room." Soon another servant came in. "Dear mistress," she cried, "the bread dough has risen soft and light. If you come and knead it at once, the bread will be better than usual." "Go away," answered Elsa. "I want candle wicks, dear mistress," called a third. "Go away," answered Elsa. "What food shall we prepare for dinner tomorrow?" shouted a fourth. "Go away," answered Elsa. And so it went. Servant after servant came running into the room asking for orders, but Elsa would only answer, "Go away," and she would not get up. At last Gunnar could stand it no longer. There were he and his men, long delayed in their start for the woods because no one knew what to pack for their luncheon. So off he went to Elsa's room. "Dear Elsa," he said gently, "my mother used to prepare things the night before, so that the servants might begin work early in the morning. She did not lie in bed when the sun was up. My men and I are off now, with I know not what in our lunch bags. Surely you are ready by this time to rise. Remember there are a few yards of cloth on the loom waiting to be woven." Then Gunnar went away. As soon as he was gone, Elsa got up grumbling and yawning. After she had dressed herself, she slowly ate her breakfast, and then went loitering off through the kitchen to the little house where the loom was kept. But when she got there, she slammed the door behind her and threw herself down on a couch. "No," she cried, half sobbing, "I won't do this weaving. I won't toil and drudge. Who would have thought that Gunnar would make me work like a servant? Oh me, oh me, is there no one to help me?" "I can help you," said a deep voice. Then Elsa, raising her head in astonishment, saw an old man in a grey cloak and a broad-brimmed hat standing close by her side. "I am Old Man Hoberg," he said, "and have served your family for many years. You, my child, are unhappy because you are idle. To be idle makes any man miserable. I will give you 10 obedient servants who shall do all your tasks for you." At that he shook his long grey cloak, and out of its folds tumbled 10 queer little men. For a moment they capered and pranced about, then they swiftly put the room in order and finished weaving the cloth on the loom. When their work was done, they came running up and stood in a row before Elsa, as though awaiting her orders. "Dear child, reach hither your hands," said the old man. Trembling and uncertain, Elsa held out the tips of her fingers. Then he cried, "Hop o' my thumb, lick the pot, long pole, heart in hand, little Peter, funny man, away all of you to your places." In the twinkling of an eye the little men popped into Elsa's fingers, and the old man vanished from sight. For a moment Elsa sat staring at her hands. Then suddenly a great desire to work came over her. Up she jumped. "Why am I idling here?" she cried. "It is late in the morning and nothing done in the house," and she hastened off to the kitchen. Soon she was giving orders to the servants, setting things to rights everywhere, and singing while she prepared the dinner. When Gunnar came home that night, all was clean and bright to welcome him, and Elsa's face shone brighter than all the rest. "Oh!" he cried heartily, "some good fairy has been here." Elsa smiled and held up her 10 rosy fingers. "10 good fairies," she said. After that Elsa rose early each morning and went about her work sweet-tempered and happy. The farmhouse prospered under her hands, and health and wealth and happiness came to stay when she learned how to manage those 10 little elves. End of section 61.
Section 62 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Capricia Page. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. Edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. A Psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table for me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Psalm 23. End of section 62. Recording by Capricia Page.
Section 63 of Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Grace Garrett. Up One Pair of Stairs of My Book House. Edited by Olive Beaupre Miller. The Feast of the Tabernacles, the first Thanksgiving festival. Adapted from the Bible. In the autumn, men gather in from the field and orchard and vineyard the rich harvest, and when their storehouses are bursting with golden grain and ripened fruit, their hearts go out in rejoicing and thanksgiving to God, who made all that was made, and causes it to grow and bring forth fruit abundantly. In the early days, long, long ago, the whole nation of the Israelites, men, women, and children, wandered for many years through the desert and through the wilderness. They had no settled home, but dwelt in tents or tabernacles, and they had neither field nor orchard, because they journeyed from place to place continually. Yet God led them every step of the way through the wilderness, and brought them at last to a good land, which he had promised to them. There he caused them to build again their dwelling places, and to plant vineyard, field, and orchard. And when the people saw once more the fruitfulness of God, made manifest in plenteous harvest, they sang in their hearts, O come, let us sing unto the Lord, let us come before his presence with thanksgiving, and make a joyful noise unto him with psalms. And in honor of him who had saved them from the wilderness, and brought forth for them so rich a harvest, they kept year after year the commandment of God, which had come to them in these words, In the 15th day of the 7th month, when ye have gathered in the fruit of the land, ye shall keep a feast unto the Lord 7 days. And ye shall take you on the first day to the boughs of goodly trees, branches of palm trees, and the boughs of thick trees, and the willows of the brook. Ye shall make you booths of branches, and dwell not in your houses, but in the booths for 7 days, that your generation may know I made the children of Israel to dwell in booths, when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. And thou shalt rejoice in thy feast, thou and thy son and thy daughter, and thy manservant, and thy maidservant, and the Levite, the stranger, and the fatherless that are within thy gates. 7 days thou shalt keep a solemn feast unto the Lord thy God, because the Lord thy God shall bless thee in all thine increase, and in all the works of thine hands, therefore thou shalt surely rejoice. So the people went forth, and brought them olive branches, and pine branches, and myrtle branches, and palm branches, and made themselves booths, every one upon the roof of his house, and in their courts, and in the courts of the house of God, and in the streets. And there was very great gladness. End of section 63.